By the time Ruth Mercer's children decided the farm was dead, the water had reached the second porch step and was carrying one of Dale's red gas cans through the yard like a little metal boat. Cal stood at the kitchen window, with his phone pressed to his ear, describing the machine shed to an auctioneer. Mara had found a roll of blue painter's tape and was labeling furniture keep, discard, or unsafe. Evan leaned against the counter, arms folded, staring at the muddy line on the wallpaper. "Let the river have it," he said. All three of them looked at Ruth, waiting for her to agree. She was still wearing the clothes she had slept in inside the old grain truck. Dale's green work shirt, stiff jeans, one damp sock, one dry one. Nobody had asked why her socks did not match. Nobody had asked whether she had slept. Outside, the brown water lay almost perfectly still. That was wrong. Ruth did not yet know why it was wrong, only that 46 years of watching rain move across that ground had taught her to distrust stillness. Water had somewhere to go. It always did. Mara pulled a strip of tape from the roll. "Mom, this chair smells like creek." It smelled peculiar before the creak. Evan made a sound that might have been a laugh. Mara did not. She pressed discard onto the back of Dale's recliner, smoothing the tape with her thumbnail. "It's soaked through." "He died in that chair," Cal said, still holding the phone against his chest. "That's not the argument for keeping it. You think it is." This time Evan did laugh, though he covered it with a cough. Ruth watched Mara's mouth tighten. Her daughter had driven down from Bloomington before dawn, crossed 2 barricades, and brought 4 plastic bins, rubber gloves, protein bars, contractor bags, and a folding clipboard. Mara had always arrived prepared enough to make everyone else feel negligent. Cal ended his call. "Auction guy can come Tuesday, assuming Route 9 is open." Ruth turned from the window. "What auction guy?" "The one I just talked to." "I gathered that much." Cal rubbed his free hand over his face. He was 44, broad through the shoulders like Dale had been, but his beard had gone gray in 2 patches beside his mouth. "We have to move fast on the equipment. Sitting in water doesn't improve tractors. The big tractors on the ridge. The combine isn't. The combine hasn't run right in 2 years, which also doesn't improve its value." He said it gently, as if Ruth were the one being difficult in a room where people had begun selling her belongings during breakfast. On the table, beside a box of powdered donuts, Mara had placed a glossy brochure. A silver-haired woman in white pants was laughing over a bowl of salad with 3 other silver-haired women. "Lakeside Senior. Living," the cover said, though Ruth knew for a fact there was no lake there. There was a retention pond behind a pharmacy. Ruth picked up the brochure. Mara stopped pulling tape. "This your idea of a joke?" Ruth asked. "It's not a nursing home. I didn't say it was. They have apartments, full kitchens. You'd have your own things." "Which things? The ones with blue tape or the ones without?" "Mom, you'd better label the brochure. It's close to the coffee." Cal sighed. Evan looked down at his boots. Ruth set the brochure back exactly where she had found it. She wanted coffee badly enough to drink what was left in the pot, although it had been made on the camp stove with bottled water and tasted faintly of propane. Her hands shook when she lifted the mug. She put it down before anyone noticed. Mara noticed. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday." "What yesterday?" "The usual kind." "What time?" "Lord, Mara." "Answer her," Cal said. Ruth looked at him. "You're selling my combine, she's throwing away your father's chair, and Evan's surrendering the farm to the state of Illinois. I don't believe any of you have earned authority over my breakfast." Evan unfolded his arms. "I'm not surrendering anything. I don't own it. Thank you for that legal insight. I'm saying maybe this is the thing that finally lets us stop." The kitchen went quiet except for the camp stove, hissing under an empty kettle. Ruth knew what he meant by us. He did not mean the 4 of them standing there. He meant the family as it had existed under Dale's weather reports, Dale's planting schedule, Dale's temper, Dale's promise that everything would settle down after harvest. Evan had left at 21 and learned to cook in restaurant kitchens where men shouted for reasons that made sense to him. He came home for holidays when guilt overcame memory. He had been the one to sit beside Dale's hospital bed through the final night, then disappeared before the funeral casseroles were gone. Ruth lifted the mug again. "Stop what?" Evan's jaw shifted. "Pretending this place is something we all want. I don't recall asking you to want it. No, you just spent 40 years acting like we'd come around." Cal picked up the donut box and peered inside, apparently hoping another conversation might be hiding under the waxed paper. Mara tore a strip of blue tape too hard. It curled against itself. Ruth drank the coffee. It was as bad as expected, which was almost comforting. The first warning had come shortly after dark, a knock from Tess Alvarez, their tenant, shouting that the creek had crossed the lower road. By 9, water was pushing beneath the machine shed doors. At 11, the lights flickered and Ruth began carrying blankets, medicine, Dale's old flashlight, and the strongbox from the bedroom closet to the grain truck parked on the rise. She had gone back for the coffee pot. That was the foolish part everybody would seize upon, so she had told no one. Inside the mudroom, an outlet snapped blue when water touched the wall. The sound sent her backward into the washing machine. She left without the coffee pot, climbed into the truck, and sat through the remaining hours with the doors locked and the windshield wipers ticking long after the rain stopped. She had watched the yard disappear by increments, first the gravel, then the bottom fence wire, then the little concrete birdbath Dale claimed to hate and secretly leveled every spring. At 2 in the morning, one porch light remained visible across the water. Ruth stared at it and thought, with a clarity that frightened her, Dale would know what to do. Then she had gotten angry because Dale had known what to do right up until his heart stopped, and afterward everybody behaved as though his knowledge had been buried with him. By sunrise, Tess reached the truck in a borrowed John boat. Ruth disliked boats, borrowed or otherwise, but she climbed in. She spent the ride holding Dale's flashlight above her head while Tess paddled past a floating sack of fertilizer and swore in both English and Spanish. Cal met them at the road. He hugged Ruth so hard her cheek struck his zipper, then called her reckless before letting go. Now, 6 hours later, his fear had changed into phone calls. Mara's had become labels. Evan's had become honesty sharp enough to use as a blade. Ruth understood these transformations. She had spent most of her life turning fear into biscuits, clean laundry, paid invoices, and sentences that began, Dale didn't mean it that way. Understanding did not make the blue tape easier to look at. Mara peeled the ruined strip from her glove. You can't stay here tonight. I hadn't planned to sleep standing up. Leona said you can use the apartment over the feed store. Leona talks too much. She called me, proof of my point. The power's cut, the well may be contaminated, and there's water under the house. Cal has your truck keys. Ruth turned toward him. Cal pulled the keys from his jacket pocket, but he did not offer them. Dale's brass seed company tag hung from the ring. Ruth had used that truck 4 days ago to haul fence posts. Now her son held the keys with an expression he must have practiced on difficult employees. The sheriff's got the roads closed, he said. Then I won't use the roads that are closed. Mom, stop. Give me my keys. I will when it's safe. She crossed the kitchen and held out her hand. Cal was taller, heavier, and tired enough to be stubborn. For several seconds he did nothing. Ruth saw the boy he had been and the man he had become occupying the same face, each convinced that love meant not backing down. Mara spoke softly. Please don't make this the fight. Ruth kept her hand out. Cal dropped the keys into it. The brass tag struck her palm. She closed her fingers. All right, he said. But if you drive through standing water, I know. You say that about everything. I've had more time than you to learn things. And more time to hide them. That came from Evan. Ruth turned, but he had already looked away. A silence opened between them, wider than the kitchen. Somewhere outside, sheet metal banged in the current. Cal reached for his phone again. I'm going to the shed to photograph what I can. Haskell might come Monday if the road opens. Haskell? Cal froze for half a beat. Wade Haskell. I know who he is. Why is Wade Haskell coming here? He's been interested in the road frontage for years. He wanted to put truck storage on it, among other options. Your father told him no. Dad's dead. The words landed without cruelty. That made them worse. Cal looked sorry immediately, but Ruth would not rescue him from what he had said. Not this time. Mara removed one glove finger by finger. Nobody's signing anything today. Cal's just looking at possibilities. I don't need possibilities brought to my house in work boots. Mom, look outside. I have. The fields are underwater. I have noticed. The furnace is ruined. The wiring could be ruined. You can't run this place alone even when it isn't flooded. Ruth's eyes moved from Mara to Cal, then to Evan. Is this what you all came to say? No, Mara said too quickly. Cal shoved his phone into his pocket. Evan was the only one who met Ruth's gaze. His face had Dale's narrow shape and none of Dale's caution. "I came to get you out," he said. "But yes, I think you should sell. I think Cal does too. Mara's been trying to get you closer to her since Dad got sick." Mara whispered his name. "What?" Evan said. She asked. "We keep talking around her like she can't hear us." Ruth looked at the senior living brochure, at the blue tape on the recliner, at the mud Cal had tracked across the floor while arranging an auction. Her children had arrived from 3 directions and somehow reached the same conclusion before they reached her door. "And none of you wants this place," she said. Cal scratched his beard. Mara stared at the tape roll. Evan answered, "No." The water bumped something heavy against the porch, once, twice. Ruth went to the window. Beyond the yard, the flooded acreage shone beneath a pale strip of afternoon sky. The current moved along the roadside ditch. She could see it now in the trembling weeds. But across the south field, the water remained flat, held in place as if by an invisible wall. Near the far fence, only the top of an old sycamore showed above the flood. Ruth stared at that white branch. A picture came to her, not complete, not yet. Dale, as a younger man, on a yellow bulldozer. His mother standing in the field with her raincoat open, shouting that they were filling the wrong ground. Ruth herself beside a line of fence posts that no longer existed. Water had once crossed there. Behind her, Mara began explaining Leona's apartment. Cal mentioned Monday again. Evan opened a contractor bag with a snap. Ruth pressed Dale's brass tag into her palm and watched the still water. Then she remembered which way it used to run. The brass tag left a seed-shaped mark in Ruth's palm. She slipped the keys into her shirt pocket before Cal could change his mind and said, "The water used to run south of that sycamore." Nobody answered. She had not expected them to. From the kitchen, the sycamore was a pale scratch nearly 300 yards away. Mara was looking at Ruth the way she looked at a sentence that did not belong in the conversation. "What water?" Mara asked. "The water outside." "We know it's outside, Mom." Ruth let the curtain fall. The memory had arrived as a picture, not an explanation. Dale on the bulldozer, Fern Mercer waving both arms, the old fence line dipping through the lower field. If Ruth spoke too soon, Cal would tell her the land had changed. Mara would ask whether she was confused, and Evan would find some precise way to connect the mistake to Dale. "I'll go to Leona's," she said. The relief on their faces was insulting. Mara recovered first. "Good. Thank you. I didn't say I was moving into the fake lake. One dry night. That's all we're talking about. That is not all you've been talking about." Ruth went upstairs before Mara could answer. The carpet on the landing was damp beneath her socks. She stepped around the dark patches and entered the bedroom she had shared with Dale for more than 4 decades. The air smelled of wet plaster and his aftershave. That was impossible. Ruth had emptied the bottle months ago, because seeing 1 amber inch in the bottom had become unbearable. Yet the smell came to her clearly, mixed with creek mud and the lavender sachets Mara gave her every Christmas. She took clean clothes from the top dresser drawer. The lower drawers had swollen shut. Her medicine was already in the canvas bag she had carried to the grain truck. She added underwear, a hairbrush, and the framed photograph from the nightstand. In the picture, Dale was 32 and sunburned, Ruth 24 and pretending not to be tired. They stood in front of the farmhouse with its old white siding, both holding paintbrushes. Dale's mother, Fern, had taken the photograph and cut off the tops of their heads. Ruth almost put it back. Then she wrapped it in a nightgown and pushed it into the bag. Evan was waiting in the hall when she came out. He held a black contractor bag open. "What's that for?" "Anything you want from upstairs." "I have a bag. That thing isn't waterproof. Neither is the house, apparently." His mouth twitched. He looked past her toward the bedroom. "Want help with Dad's clothes?" "No." "We can at least get them off the floor. They're in the closet. The closet's wet." She set her bag down. The bottom of Dale's closet door was dark with moisture, and when she pulled it open, the smell of wool and damp leather rolled into the room. His work shoes sat in a row. Above them hung shirts Ruth had washed after the funeral, because she had not known what else to do that week. Evan lifted one sleeve. Water fell from the cuff. "Well," Ruth said, "he always did leave me the laundry." Evan laughed once, then pressed his lips together. They carried the shirts to the bed. Some were damp only at the hems, others had wicked water halfway to the shoulders. Evan began folding the salvageable ones instead of stuffing them into the contractor bag. You fold like a restaurant, Ruth said. I fold like somebody with 6 shirts and no closet. Is your apartment still that small? It has a closet. Then you own more than 6 shirts. I own 8. Ruth picked up a brown flannel shirt. Your father liked the meal you made at Christmas. He sent his steak back. He liked doing that. He was at his own table. I didn't say it made sense. Evan folded another shirt. Did he ever tell you he liked anything before it was too late to enjoy it? Ruth could have said Dale loved the pickled onions Evan brought that year. She could have said he ate them from the jar after everyone left. That was the kind of small translation she had performed all her life, carrying tenderness from the person who would not express it to the person tired of waiting. He should have told you himself, she said. Evan's hands stopped. From downstairs, Cal called that they needed to leave before the light went. Ruth picked up her bag. Evan put 2 of Dale's shirts into the contractor sack and left the rest spread on the bed. Neither of them said whether the shirts were being saved. Crossing the yard required Tess's boat again. Cal climbed in first, one boot filling with water when he misjudged the depth. Under other circumstances, Ruth would have enjoyed that. Mara sat in the middle and held Ruth's canvas bag against her chest. Evan pushed them away from the porch with an aluminum paddle. The boat passed Dale's gas can, trapped in the branches of a lilac bush. Can we get that? Ruth asked. Cal looked at the lowering sun. It's a gas can. It's a good gas can. I'll buy you another one. That one's already paid for. Evan turned the boat with 2 short strokes and hooked the can by its handle. He set it at Ruth's feet without comment. The water grew shallower near the grain truck. Tess had left her truck on the county road and the John boat chained to a fence post, though only the top 18 inches of the post remained visible. Cal steadied Ruth while she climbed onto the submerged lane. She hated needing his arm and hated herself for jerking away too quickly. Her truck stood on the rise where she had left it, mud dried in fans across the lower doors. Mara reached for the keys. I'm driving, Ruth said. You haven't slept. I slept. In a truck. This truck, as it happens. We're acquainted. Mara glanced at Cal, but he had learned enough from the kitchen to busy himself wringing out his sock. Leona Brooks lived above Brooks Feed and Seed in a brick building that had once housed her father's hardware store. The store was closed, but Leona had left the side door unlocked and a handwritten sign taped to the glass. Ruth, come up. Everyone else knock. Subtle, Evan said. She's losing her touch, Ruth told him. Leona waited at the top of the stairs, wearing purple reading glasses and holding a wooden spoon. At 67, she had a crown of white curls, a narrow face, and the judgmental posture of a heron. She looked Ruth over from wet boots to tangled hair. You smell terrible. I was flooded. That explains the creak, not the rest. Ruth kissed her cheek. Leona's apartment was warm enough to make Ruth's skin sting. A pot of chicken soup simmered on the stove. Clean towels sat in a stack beside the bathroom door, and a new toothbrush waited on top. Mara noticed all of it. Thank you for doing this. Leona looked at her over the purple glasses. Your mother has fed me through 2 divorces and 1 gallbladder. I can spare a toothbrush. 1 divorce, Ruth said. The first one didn't take. The first one was rehearsal. Cal carried Ruth's bag to the spare bedroom. Evan set the rescued gas can in the bathtub until Leona ordered him to put it on the back landing. For 10 minutes, everybody talked at once about road closures, electrical inspections, bottled water, and what Ruth should not do. Ruth sat at the kitchen table eating soup. When Cal mentioned Wade Haskell's name, Leona stopped stirring the pot. That man still wearing those pointy shoes? She asked. He's a legitimate buyer, Cal said. Didn't say he wasn't. A snake is a legitimate animal, Leona, Ruth murmured. What? I'm hospitable, not dishonest. Mara set 2 bottles of water beside Ruth's bowl. Nobody is making a decision tonight. Monday isn't tonight, Cal said. Ruth put down her spoon. Cancel him. Cal leaned against the counter. Just hear the offer? There is no offer. There can't be until he sees the damage. Then spare him the drive. His face tightened. Why? Because Dad turned him down 15 years ago? Because I'm turning him down now. You haven't even heard a number. I heard truck storage. That was one proposal. He develops commercial property. He pours gravel on dirt and rents the gravel. Leona pointed her spoon at Cal. Accurate. Cal ignored her. The road frontage is the only part that may still bring decent money after this. The road frontage included the low ground near the vanished fence line. Ruth saw the old yellow bulldozer again, its blade pushing black soil into the shallow channel, Dale's bare forearm on the lever, Fern standing in rain boots, yelling from a safe distance because Dale never listened better when a person stood close. Dale had called it improving the field. Fern had called it plugging a bathtub and waiting for rain. At the time, Ruth had laughed. Dale did not. "We're not discussing it tonight," Mara said. Cal pushed away from the counter. "Fine. Monday." Ruth looked at him. "No." He grabbed his damp jacket from the chair. "You're exhausted. I'm not fighting with you. That's generous." "Mom, I have said no twice. A third no will not become more decorative." Evan lowered his eyes, but Ruth caught the hint of a smile. Cal left without finishing his soup. Mara followed him down the stairs, carrying his dry boot and scolding him for hopping too fast. Evan remained at the table. "You remember something?" he said. Ruth's spoon touched the bottom of the bowl. "I remember lots of things." "At the window? You saw something. Water. You looked like Dad when he was about to take apart an engine. That is a hateful thing to say to your mother." It wasn't entirely hateful. Leona began stacking bowls, making enough noise to excuse herself from listening. Ruth wiped her mouth with a napkin. The field didn't used to hold water like that. Evan waited. "Your grandmother Fern showed me an old slough when I first came here. It crossed the south field." "Where?" "I'm not certain. You said by the sycamore. I said south of it. Same difference." "It is not remotely the same difference." Evan leaned back. "So what happened to it?" "Your father wanted more acres." There it was, spoken aloud. Not the whole memory, but enough to change the air. Evan nodded as if Dale had reached out from the grave to prove a point. Ruth disliked the satisfaction in his face. Dry years had been hard on us. That ground looked usable. He wasn't filling it out of spite. "Did you think it was a good idea?" "I thought a lot of things." "That's not an answer." "No, it's what you're getting." Evan rubbed his thumb along a scratch in the table. "If he blocked it, can it be opened?" Leona stopped at the sink. Ruth looked from Evan to her friend and back. "I don't know." The next morning, Tess Alvarez knocked before 7, with 2 travel mugs and a pair of rubber waders folded over one arm. "You look better," Tess said when Ruth opened the door. "You're a poor liar. I manage crops. Lying about appearances is outside my training." Ruth took the waders. Below them, the feed store was dark and smelled of grain dust, leather gloves, and fertilizer. Tess unlocked the side door. Cold morning air came in sharp and clean after the overheated apartment. "You want to see the south field?" Tess said. Ruth paused with one boot on the sidewalk. "Evan called you. He asked whether Buckeye Slough was a real name. It was never much of a slough. Then this should be quick." The John boat scraped over gravel where water had covered the road the day before. Tess pushed until they floated, climbed in, and passed Ruth a paddle. As they crossed the yard, Ruth saw the flood had dropped 4 inches around the porch. Along the roadside ditch, foam and twigs traveled east at a brisk, purposeful speed. Beyond the house, the field remained a brown mirror. Tess guided the boat around the crown of the old farm lane. A culvert mouth showed briefly beneath the water, clogged with corn stalks. On the far side, the surface did not move at all. "Too much water for that pipe," Tess said. "It was always too small." They continued toward the sycamore. Only its upper branches rose above the flood, bone white against the trees beyond the south fence. Ruth watched the water, searching for a line that soil and time had erased. "Turn left," she said. Tess dipped the paddle. Here, more. The boat swung south. 20 yards past the sycamore, the paddle suddenly sank deeper in Tess's hands. A faint pull caught the boat and nudged its bow toward the drowned meadow. Tess felt it too. She looked at Ruth. Under the flat brown surface, the old slough was still there. Tess let the boat drift. The bow turned by itself, slow as a compass needle, until it pointed past the sycamore toward the south fence. "Well," she said, "that's not nothing." Ruth dipped her paddle beside the boat. It slid down nearly to the handle before touching bottom. "Deep here, 3 feet deeper than it is 10 yards east. Go toward the fence." Tess paddled twice. The faint current carried them another 20 yards, then faded. Beneath the water, Ruth's paddle struck something firm and sloping. She pushed against it. Mud rose in a dark cloud. "Ground comes up fast," she said. "Natural rise? No. She sounded the bottom again. Deep behind them, shallow ahead. The boat had reached the edge of the ground Dale filled. Ruth could see him clearly now, though she wished she could not. It had been August of 1988, during the second dry summer in a row. The creek had shrunk to disconnected pools, and Dale had spent weeks hauling soil from the high bank to level the south field. He said an 18-acre rectangle would plant cleaner than 15 acres wrapped around a useless wet scar. Fern stood under the sycamore with a jar of iced tea going warm in her hand. "You don't get rid of a waterway by covering it," she had called. Dale kept driving. "You just make the water find you someplace more expensive." Ruth had been on the tractor pulling a soil pan. She had heard every word and hauled the next load anyway. "Ruth?" She blinked. Tess was watching her. "Keep going west along this edge." They followed the buried slope until the boat brushed the top strand of a submerged fence. Tess backed them away. A plastic mineral tub floated upside down on the other side, bumping softly against a post. "The old line ran through there," Ruth said. "That belongs to the lower meadow. It's all the same parcel." "I know whose it is. I'm thinking about the fall." Ruth looked south. Beyond the drowned fence, the meadow dropped toward a stand of cottonwoods and, farther still, Buckeye Creek. The water there was lower. Not dramatically lower, but enough that reeds showed above the surface instead of only treetops. "If this ridge opened," Tess said, "everything behind us would try to get through at once. It wouldn't all fit. No, it would cut." Ruth knew what she meant. A careless breach could become a ditch before anyone stopped it, stripping topsoil and taking fence with it. Water did not reward being remembered. It still required respect. "We'd start narrow," Ruth said. "We are not starting anything from a boat with 2 paddles. I didn't say today." "You had the voice." "What voice?" "The one you use when you say you're only looking, then I find you changing mower blades." Ruth pushed the paddle down again. "I own the mower. You also own all your fingers, and I'd like you to keep the current arrangement." They followed the buried ridge east until it merged with the raised farm lane. Near the culvert, corn stalks and branches had formed a thick mat against the upstream opening. Ruth could hear water sucking beneath it. "That can be cleared," she said. "Not by us?" "I know. Do you?" Ruth gave her a look. Tess rested the paddle across her knees. At 48, she wore her black hair braided beneath a cap and treated concern like an argument she intended to win. 6 years earlier, after a divorce left her with half the equipment and most of the debt, 3 landowners had declined to renew her leases. Dale wanted to do the same. Ruth had insisted Tess stay, though she had never told her how ugly the disagreement became. Now half of Tess's crop lay under brown water. "What happens to my lease if you put the slough back?" Tess asked. There was no accusation in it, which made Ruth answer carefully. "You'd lose acres. Good acres. Good until this week. They've been good 5 years out of 6, and the 6th could take the rest." Tess watched foam tremble against the clogged culvert. "Cal wants you to sell. Cal wants many things." Didn't answer me. "Yes. And Mara. Wants me in an apartment beside a pond pretending to be a lake. Evan wants the farm to confess." Tess smiled despite herself. "That sounds like Evan. They all say they don't want it. You do." Ruth looked across the water at the roof of the machine shed. "I don't know what I want yet." It was the first honest answer she had given anyone. Wanting the farm as it had been was useless. Dale was gone. The combine was wet. Her tenant's crop had drowned. The kitchen floor would probably buckle, and the smell inside the walls had already begun. She could not want backward hard enough to make any of that reverse, but leaving because her children had held a meeting inside their separate worries and decided her future that she knew she did not want. Tess paddled toward the house. "We should talk to Harlan Pike. Harlan's still alive? He called me during the storm to explain that my generation had ruined drainage. That sounds alive. He worked for the old drainage contractor when Dale filled this. Then he probably helped, which means he may remember what's under it." Ruth disliked how quickly the idea gave her energy. Energy could be mistaken for strength, and strength could become foolishness before lunch. At the yard, Evan stood thigh-deep beside the porch, wearing chest waders that were too large for him. He held Dale's red gas can in one hand. "You brought that back," Ruth called. He was pouring out whatever got inside. Tess guided the boat near him. "Morning. Found her then." "You told half the county where I was going?" Ruth asked. I called one person. That is how counties work. Evan caught the bow. Mara thinks you're asleep. Then this will be an educational morning for her. He steadied Ruth as she climbed out. This time she accepted the hand without performing independence for either of them. The water had dropped enough to reveal the porch's bottom step. Mud coated it like chocolate frosting. Evan followed Ruth inside, carrying the gas can, while Tess went toward the machine shed to check her tractor. The house smelled worse. Heat had awakened everything the flood left behind. Wet insulation, spilled grain, creek bottom, the sweet rot of the rug in the front room. Ruth opened windows. Evan lifted the rug by one corner. This is gone. Yes. He looked surprised. It's a rug, not a relative. That philosophy did not extend to the gas can. A good gas can has practical value. Together they dragged the rug through the front door. It folded against itself with a wet slap and nearly pulled Evan off the porch. Ruth laughed. He stood in the shallow water, holding a corner of the ruined rug, and laughed too. It was the first easy sound she had heard from him since he arrived. They laid it over the porch rail to drain. You found the slough? He asked. We found a low channel and the edge of filled ground, so Dad did block it. Part of it. And that's why the farm flooded? Don't start passing verdicts. The creek flooded the farm. Rain flooded the creek. The old channel might have let it drain faster, but he made it worse, possibly. You always give him that word, because life contains it. Evan pulled off one glove with his teeth. He gets possibly. Everybody else gets told what they did. Ruth opened her mouth, then shut it. A truck horn sounded from the rise. Mara's car appeared beyond the water, followed by Cal's pickup. You may have called one person, Ruth said, but one person talked. Evan looked almost pleased. Counties. Mara came across in the boat with Cal paddling hard enough to punish the water. She stepped onto the porch carrying a paper sack, took one look at Ruth's waiters, and closed her eyes. You said you would stay at Leona's. I did stay at Leona's. You know what I meant? Yes. That is why I answered what you said. Cal tied the boat to the porch post. What are you doing here? Opening windows. In a contaminated house? I haven't licked the walls. Mom, this isn't funny. It was a little funny, Evan said. Mara handed him the sack. Breakfast. Make yourself useful. Inside were egg sandwiches wrapped in foil. Ruth took one before Mara could ask when she last ate. The biscuit was warm and too salty, exactly the way Leona made them. Cal saw Tess's boat pulled near the machine shed. You two went out? Ruth chewed. Where? The south field. His eyes narrowed. Why? I wanted to see where the water was holding. It's holding everywhere. No, the roadside ditch is moving. The lower field isn't. Okay. The old slough was still under there. Cal glanced toward Evan as if deciding which of them had encouraged this. Ruth swallowed. Your father filled part of it. The farm lane crosses another part. That may be why the water can't get off. Cal put both hands on his hips. Or there are millions of gallons of water sitting on flat ground because we had a flood. That is also true. So, what are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything yet. You took a boat into a flooded field at 7 in the morning. Research. You hate boats. I remain open to knowledge under difficult conditions. Mara pinched the bridge of her nose. Evan unwrapped another sandwich. Cal walked to the window and looked south. Haskell's coming at 10 tomorrow. Ruth stared at the back of his jacket. I told you to cancel. I told him we may not be ready, but he's already going to be in the area. Wade Haskell is never already in an area. He arrives where he expects to make money. He can tell us what the property's worth now. I didn't ask him to. You need facts before you start spending money on some drainage scheme. I have not spent anything. Yet. There was more strain in his voice than the conversation deserved. Ruth noticed how tightly his jacket pulled across his shoulders, how quickly his knee bounced when he stood still. Cal had mentioned slow winter business, rising costs, a commercial customer paying late. He had not asked for money. He rarely asked directly. He described a hole and waited for Ruth to offer enough to fill it. Did you promise him something? She asked. Cal turned. What? Haskell, no. Did you tell him the farm would be sold? I told him there was a good chance. Mara said. Cal, what? There is. Ruth set the rest of her sandwich on the counter. No, there isn't. You can't know that. I am the one person who can. Cal's face changed. For a second, anger dropped away and left plain fear underneath. Then he picked up the painter's tape Mara had abandoned and turned it between his fingers. "You haven't seen the bills yet," he said. "Neither have you. I know what flood restoration costs. And you know what Haskell wants? The frontage, the ground over the old slough." Cal tossed the tape onto the counter. "You're talking like a ditch nobody has seen in 30 years is more important than getting out with something." Ruth looked through the window at the flat brown field. "Maybe it is," she said. He gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You'd ruin the only valuable part." Tess entered through the mudroom, wet to the waist, carrying a broken length of cornstalk. "Value to who?" she asked. Cal turned toward her. Tess laid the cornstalk on the counter and looked at Ruth. "The culvert's packed solid. Harlan says he'll come at noon if somebody picks him up. He also says Dale didn't just fill the channel." Ruth felt a small coldness beneath her ribs. What else did he do? Built the farm lane right across its throat. "Throat," Cal repeated. "That sounds scientific." "It sounds like Harlan," Tess said. "He enjoys a dramatic noun." Ruth picked up the cornstalk. One end had been softened to pulp by the pressure at the culvert. How packed. Branches, stalks, a fence post, maybe part of a gate. I couldn't see the bottom. "You went under?" I reached from the tractor steps. "You shouldn't have done that." Tess gave her a level look. "Interesting." Ruth set the stalk down. Cal gestured at it. "The culvert is blocked with flood debris. There's your problem. Clear it and see what happens." "Water's pushing hard behind that blockage," Tess said. "Nobody touches it until we can get equipment on stable ground. I didn't say pull it out by hand." "No, you said it in the voice people use before somebody else pulls it out by hand." Evan raised his sandwich toward her. "You two have identified everybody's voices. We spend time outdoors. It sharpens the ear." Mara took charge of the room before Cal could answer. She divided the remaining food, made Ruth drink half a bottle of water, and began a list of things that could be accomplished without drowning. An electrician would come once the lane was passable. The insurance company had assigned an adjuster but would not give a date. A restoration service could remove drywall on Wednesday. "Don't authorize them yet," Ruth said. "They're not going to tear out anything dry. Have you met a restoration service? Have you restored many flooded houses?" "No. That's why I still have money." Mara's pen stopped. "You have insurance. I have insurance with exclusions, limits, and a strong desire to misunderstand nouns. What does it cover? When the adjuster comes, perhaps we'll all find out together." Cal looked toward the south field again. Ruth could almost hear him attaching prices to everything the water touched. She took the list from Mara and read it. At the bottom, beneath electrician and well test, her daughter had written Tour Lakeside, Thursday, then crossed it out so lightly the words remained visible. Ruth handed the paper back without comment. Harlan Pike arrived at 12:10 in Tess's pickup. Wearing clean denim overalls and carrying a cane, he seemed to regard as a personal insult. He had gone narrow with age, all elbows and cheekbones, but his white mustache remained large enough for a stronger man. Leona climbed out from the passenger side. "Nobody invited you," Ruth said. "Harlan can't drive, and Tess can't hear him over her truck's bad muffler." "My muffler is fine," Tess called from the porch. "It announces left turns." Harlan studied the water from the rise. Dale always said that Lane would outlive him. "It did," Ruth said. "Shame it picked an owl to prove him right." They put Harlan and Leona in the John boat. Ruth sat between them while Tess and Evan paddled. Cal followed in a second borrowed boat with Mara, who clutched the sides and kept her eyes fixed on Ruth. Harlan said nothing until they reached the crown of the farm lane. He tapped the aluminum hull with his cane, and Tess turned them toward the clogged culvert. "Don't get close," he said. Ruth leaned enough to see the upstream mouth. A gray fence post lay crosswise beneath the surface. Cornstalks, plastic, branches, and grass had woven themselves into a dense raft. Water pressed through in thin, fast streams that made the debris tremble. Harlan pointed south with his cane. "Lane sits 5 feet over the old bottom right here, maybe 5.5. You remember?" Ruth asked. "I set the grade stakes." The bluntness of it silenced her. Harlan looked at the sky instead of her. Told Dale the pipe was undersized. He said he wasn't spending for a 100-year rain. "This isn't a 100-year rain," Tess said. "No. We've had 3 of those since 2008. Cal brought the second boat alongside. If the pipe was working, would it be enough? Enough for normal runoff. And this?" Harlan looked around at the drowned fields. "Does this appear normal to you? I'm asking if clearing it solves the standing water. It helps. Might drop it some. Might also send that post through the outlet and tear up whatever's below. What's below? The lane ditch, then filled ground. Dale wanted the channel gone straight through to the meadow. Ruth remembered truckloads of soil moving past the kitchen windows. She remembered Fern refusing to eat supper with them. Dale had joked that his mother loved mosquitoes more than progress. Ruth had laughed then too. Not because it was funny, because a laugh could move a meal past the dangerous place. Harlan pointed toward the sycamore. Original slough came from northwest, bent there, passed under where we're sitting, then widened south. We straightened the ditch on the north side, filled the bend, and built the road. We? Evan asked. Harlan turned toward him. Me, your father, 2 laborers, and a bulldozer that smoked worse than Leona's second husband. He died, Leona said. Smoking worse than him is still a measurement. Evan did not smile. Did anybody tell my father it was a bad idea? Everybody tells a man on a bulldozer something. Machine makes it convenient not to hear. Ruth looked down at her hands. Harlan saw. His voice softened. Dry year makes wet ground look like a mistake. We all had short memories. Fern didn't, Ruth said. No. Your mother-in-law could hold a warning longer than most people hold a grudge. She managed both. Harlan's mustache moved with a brief smile. They paddled along the buried route. Harlan found it by trees and distances that seemed meaningless until the paddle struck deeper water, exactly where he predicted. At the filled ridge, he asked Tess to hold the boat still. This is your choke point, he said, not the pipe, this whole hump. How much has to come out? Ruth asked. Depends what you want. I want the water off the house. Then a temporary cut might do. Narrow, armored with rock so it doesn't run away from you. But if the slough is coming back permanent, that's different work. Broader channel, gentle sides, new crossing or no farm lane. Cal shifted in his boat. And 18 acres gone. Not gone, Harlan said. Wet. Wet doesn't pay cash rent. Tess's paddle paused. Neither does drowned corn. Cal flushed. I'm aware. Are you? Because you've discussed your mother's sale, the frontage, the equipment, and the buyer. You haven't asked what I lost. This is family business. I farm this ground. The flood included me without checking my last name. Ruth felt the old impulse to smooth the moment, to tell Tess Cal did not mean it, to tell Cal Tess was tired. She kept her mouth closed. Mara, of all people, broke the silence. What did you lose? Tess glanced at her. 71 planted acres, maybe more if the water stays warm. Seed, fertilizer, fuel, work. Insurance won't make it whole. I'm sorry, Mara said. So am I. Harlan dipped the end of his cane into the water. Every day this sits, damage spreads. Roots suffocate. Silt settles. House keeps soaking from below. Cal looked at Ruth. That doesn't mean digging up the frontage is the answer. No, she said. It means waiting for Haskell isn't. Back at the house, Harlan lowered himself into Dale's dry kitchen chair. Leona poured coffee from a thermos. Mara cleaned the lid before drinking, then pretended she had only wiped away a drip. Harlan sketched with his finger in a layer of fine mud on the table. The roadside ditch, the lane, the buried bend, the south meadow. A test cut here, he said, marking a short line through the raised ground. Not at the culvert. Farther west, where you can control the fall. 12 inches at first. See how it takes water. With what? Ruth asked. Small excavator if it can reach from the south. Owen Beck's machine is light enough. Owen retired, Leona said. Owen announces retirement twice a year. It's how he raises his rates. Cal stood behind Ruth's chair. How much? Harlan wiped his finger on a napkin. Can't say until he sees it. Thousands? Most things involving diesel and regret are thousands. Cal laughed without humor. Great. Ruth studied the line Harlan had drawn. Could he reach from the meadow road? If the lower entrance is dry enough, he'd have to come through the east gate. The gate that washed out? Tess asked. Gate is optional if the fence is already lying down. Cal leaned over the table. Before anybody hires an excavator, Haskell is coming tomorrow. One day will not change the fields. One day already has, Ruth said. You're considering spending emergency money to cut through the part he wants to buy. I'm considering getting water away from my house. You don't know if it'll work. No. The word made everyone look at her. Ruth had spent years making certainty out of thin material because people depended on it. Yes, the check would clear. Yes, Dale would calm down. Yes, Cal could repay her when business improved. Yes, Mara's recovery would go smoothly. Yes, Evan would call when he was ready. It felt strange to place uncertainty on the table and let it remain there. No, she repeated. I don't know. Mara pulled out a chair. Then, what do you know? The water is moving in the ditch. It's moving under the old slough. It stops at the ground we put in its way. We, Evan said. Ruth looked at him. Your father drove the bulldozer. I drove the tractor. Harlan set stakes. People don't make a 46-year life alone, including the mistakes. Evan's expression shifted, disappointment mixed with something almost like respect. Cal walked to the doorway. And if the cut ruins the frontage and doesn't save the farm, then I will have made an expensive mistake with my own money. That affects what's left for everybody. Mara said his name, low and warning, but Ruth was glad he had finally spoken plainly. What's left for everybody, she said, begins after I am finished kneading it. Cal's face went still. Leona looked down into her coffee. Harlan studied his cane. Tess watched Ruth without blinking. Cal picked up his wet jacket. Here, Haskell. That's all I'm asking. No, you're asking me to preserve an option you already offered him. I'm asking you not to panic. Ruth stood. Her legs protested after the morning in the boat, but she kept one hand flat on the table until they steadied. I spent last night in a grain truck while the water reached my house, she said. If I were going to panic, I'd have done it before breakfast. Cal left through the mudroom. Mara remained long enough to gather the empty cups. She touched Ruth's shoulder once, a quick press that could have meant comfort or apology, then followed him. Evan looked toward the door. He's in trouble. I know. How much? He hasn't said. Will you ask? When he is ready to answer, instead of invoice me through a farm buyer. Harlan pushed himself up with his cane. I can call Owen. Ruth looked at the muddy line on the table. The coffee cups had blurred part of it, but the short mark through the buried ridge remained. Ask him to look, she said. Only look. Harlan nodded. Leona snorted. What? Ruth asked. I've known you 38 years. Only look has never survived contact with a price you could almost afford. At 9 the next morning, Wade Haskell's black sport utility vehicle stopped on the rise an hour early. Ruth saw the pointed brown shoes first when he stepped into the mud. Behind him, strapped to a trailer, sat Owen Beck's small excavator. Owen Beck climbed out of his pickup and waved as if he had not arrived behind a man planning to buy the ground he meant to cut open. He was 70, square-bodied, and dressed in oil-stained coveralls. His excavator looked older than some marriages Ruth knew, but better maintained. Wade Haskell stared back at the trailer. That yours? No, Owen said. Stole it slow enough nobody noticed. Wade decided not to laugh. Cal emerged from his pickup at the far side of the rise. He wore clean jeans and a blue button-down shirt, clothes chosen for a business conversation rather than flood cleanup. When he saw Owen, he shut his door harder than necessary. I thought he was only coming to look, Cal said. He brought what he looks with, Ruth replied. Wade crossed the muddy shoulder in careful steps. He was in his late 50s, trim and pink-faced, with silver hair that did not move in the wind. His pointed shoes sank at each heel. Mrs. Mercer. He took Ruth's hand in both of his. Terrible situation. Just terrible. It has been damp. I was sorry to hear about Dale last year. Fine man. You tried to buy land from him 4 times. That doesn't mean I didn't respect him. No. The fact that you came back 4 times suggests you did. His smile tightened, then returned. Cal says you took a serious hit. Cal had come up behind him. The south fields are still holding. I can see that. Wade surveyed the flooded acreage with an expression Ruth recognized from livestock auctions. Concern in the mouth, arithmetic in the eyes. House take water? Under it and nearly into it. Machinery? Some. Insurance situation? Ruth looked at Cal. He raised a hand. I didn't tell him anything about insurance. I'm simply trying to understand the whole picture, Wade said. The whole picture is over 100 acres. You're looking at it? Wade glanced at the John boat chained to the fence post. Can we get down there? If you don't mind ruining those shoes. They've survived worse. Leona, standing near Owen's trailer with a thermos, muttered, Not judging from appearances. Mara pulled in while Tess and Evan were bringing the boat from the shallows. Her hair was still damp from a shower. and she had a cardboard tray of coffees balanced on one hand. She took in Wade, Owen, the excavator, and Cal's shirt. "Why does this look like dueling yard sales?" she asked. "Ask your brother," Ruth said. Cal took a coffee. "Haskell is here to give Mom an option." "Owen's here to remove one," Wade said pleasantly. Owen scratched his jaw. "Haven't removed anything yet." "We're looking," Ruth said. Leona handed Owen the thermos. "Told you. The trip to the house required 2 crossings." Wade insisted on going first, which left him seated beside Ruth, while Evan paddled and Cal watched from the stern. Wade kept his feet angled away from the inch of muddy water sloshing in the bottom. "This flood is going to change values all along the creek," he said. "Downward, I assume, since you're here. It changes risk. Risk affects price. So does desperation." Wade looked at her. "I don't take advantage of people." The boat scraped over something beneath the surface. Ruth steadied herself against the side. "Then you've chosen a difficult profession." At the porch, Wade stepped out too soon and sank to his calf. His pointed shoe vanished in mud. Evan caught his elbow before he fell. "Appreciate it," Wade said. "No problem." "Think I lost a shoe?" "No," Ruth said. "The ground has it." He pulled free with a sucking sound. The shoe remained on his foot, but had lost whatever dignity it arrived with. Inside, Mara opened more windows, while Cal showed Wade the watermarks, the dead furnace, and the buckling mudroom floor. Ruth followed, increasingly irritated by the tour of her losses. Wade examined the view from the kitchen window. "My interest is still the frontage, 22 to 25 acres, depending on access. For truck storage," Ruth said. "Contractor units, fenced outdoor storage, possibly a small warehouse later. The county's growing, not this week. Floodwater drains. Eventually?" "Exactly." Owen entered with Harlan, who had arrived in Tess's truck. Mud from 6 pairs of boots made Mara look briefly ill. Harlan pointed his cane toward Wade's ruined shoe. "You finally dressed for the work?" Wade smiled. "Good to see you, too." Owen spread a folded topographic print on the kitchen table. It was not a survey, only a county elevation image marked with pencil after Harlan's phone call. Ruth recognized the bend of the road and the squared boundary of the farm. "We come in from the south meadow," Owen said. "Ground there's soft, but I can keep the machine on the high edge. Cut here." His blunt finger landed directly through the frontage Wade wanted. "How wide?" Ruth asked. "Top width maybe 6 feet to start, bottom a foot. Shallow enough we can watch it. Put rock where it drops so it doesn't chew backward." Wade leaned closer. "You'd create a drainage channel across the access." "Recreate," Harlan said. "For practical purposes, create. For practical purposes, water already created it." Cal rubbed his forehead. "Can the test cut go farther west?" Owen studied the page. "Ground rises. You'd dig twice as far and still empty into the old bottom. What about east?" "Too close to the lane and culvert. If that blockage lets loose while I'm working, my wife becomes difficult." Leona nodded. "She can do better than you." "She mentions it." Mara looked at Ruth. "How much?" Owen named a figure that made the room quiet. It was less than replacing the furnace and more than Ruth had hoped. The rock would be extra if the cut needed more than one load. Restoring the entire channel would cost several times as much, perhaps far more once a proper crossing and reshaped banks were included. "This is just a test?" Mara asked. "Test that should lower some water," Owen said, "if the levels are what Harlan says." "They are," Tess said from the doorway. "I checked them twice." Cal turned to Wade. "Assuming she doesn't do this, what are we talking?" Ruth felt the question like a hand reaching across her plate. Wade did not name a price. He offered a range, broad enough to sound substantial, and low enough at the bottom to protect him from every possibility. He spoke about cleanup costs, environmental testing, access construction, and the uncertainty of future flooding. Cal listened without interrupting. Ruth divided the upper number by the acres he wanted. It was less than Dale had refused 15 years earlier. "And you'd need an answer?" she asked. "I can move quickly. That is not a length of time. 10 days to agree on terms. Closing after inspections." Cal looked at her. "It gives you enough to fix the house and keep the back acreage if you want. If I sell him the only road access." "There's the south lane. The south lane is gravel, narrow, and partly underwater. It can be improved," With what money? The sale money. Spend money from selling access to build access. That sounds like a Haskell plan. Wade folded his hands. Mrs. Mercer, I understand this is emotional. Ruth turned to him. My emotions can do arithmetic. I didn't mean otherwise. You came an hour early, stood in my wet kitchen, and valued the ground before my furnace cooled. Let's not insult each other by calling this sympathy, Cal said. He's offering a real solution. No, Owen is offering a solution. Wade is offering a purchase. At least hear me, Cal said. I heard the number. You could be done with this. There was that word again. Done. As if the farm were a punishment Ruth had failed to notice. As if her children were waiting for her to set down a burden they had already refused to touch. Wade gathered his papers. Why don't I give the family some privacy? That would have been useful before the offer, Ruth said. He paused, then nodded. I'll be in touch tomorrow. No need. Think on it. My thoughts are not moving in your direction. Cal followed Wade outside. Through the window, Ruth watched them speak beside the porch. Cal's hands moved rapidly. Wade put one hand on his shoulder. Mara stood by the table, arms crossed. You didn't have to humiliate him. Which one? You know which one. No, I truly don't. Cal is scared. So am I. The words came out quieter than Ruth intended. Mara uncrossed her arms. Ruth looked at the elevation print. I am scared of what the house will cost. I'm scared the well is bad and the foundation shifted. I'm scared Tess won't have enough crop left to keep farming this year. I am scared I'll spend money and still have to leave. Then why won't you consider the one thing that removes most of those risks? Because selling the ground the water needs creates another one. You don't know that yet. No. Mara's face softened with frustration. You're betting your savings on a memory. I'm paying to test it. Those are savings you may need to live. I need them to live now. Outside, Cal's voice rose. Ruth could not hear the words, only the tone. Wade climbed into his vehicle. His tires spun once in the mud before catching. Owen rolled up the print. I need an answer soon if you want me to start today. Rain's forecast again. Wednesday. Today, Mara said, machines here. Ruth went onto the porch. Cal stood at the water's edge, watching Wade's vehicle disappear. He turned when she approached. You couldn't give me 10 minutes. I gave you 44 years. This isn't about childhood. No. It's about you making plans with my property. I was trying to help. Then help me with the choice I made, not the one you want. You haven't made a choice. You're reacting to Dad all over again. That stopped her. Cal stepped closer. He filled the ditch, so now you have to tear it open. Haskell wanted the land, so now you can't sell it. Evan hates the farm, so now you have to prove it matters. Where are you in any of that? For one dangerous second, Ruth had no answer. Cal saw it. Regret flickered across his face, but he did not take the words back. Ruth looked over the field. Sunlight flashed on the water, bright enough to conceal its depth. I'm the one who stayed, she said. That doesn't mean you have to keep staying. No, it means I get to decide when I'm done. Owen waited beside his trailer. Tess stood near him with her hands in her jacket pockets. Harlan had lowered himself onto a feed sack Leona placed on the truck's tailgate. None of them called to Ruth. She walked up the rise. How much today? She asked Owen. The test cut, 1 load of rock, and no surprises without calling me. He named a lower figure than the full estimate. Ruth thought of the furnace, the foundation, the untouched savings account Dale had insisted they keep for emergencies. If this did not qualify, the word had no use. Do it, she said. Cal came up behind her. Mom. She gave Owen her hand. By mid-afternoon, the excavator reached the buried ridge from the south. Its bucket took the first bite of soil where Dale's bulldozer had laid it down 36 years before. The cut was barely a foot wide when brown water found it. At first, it seeped. Then the earth gave a low, wet sigh, and the farm began to drain. It did not rush through in a wall. It pushed one muddy thread between the bucket marks, then another. The threads joined, darkened, and began pulling loose dirt from the sides. Owen swung the bucket back immediately. Let it show us, Harlan called from the tailgate. The channel widened without help. Water slipped across the buried ridge and dropped into the lower meadow with a sound like someone pouring 100 buckets at once. Ruth stood on the high edge beside Tess. The current was not impressive from a distance. It was only a narrow brown ribbon across black soil. Yet behind them, the field's flat surface leaned toward it. Grass, leaves, and a floating plastic jug began moving in the same direction. Tess watched the jug. There she goes. Cal came down the slope, boots sinking. That's cutting too fast. Owen had already seen it. He lowered the bucket into the downstream end, placed a scoop of rock, and pressed it flat. The current broke around the stones instead of biting straight into the soil. Still fast, Cal said. Not now, Harlan replied. How can you tell from up there? Because I've spent 70 years avoiding unnecessary mud. Owen placed more rock along the throat. The water rose briefly against it, searched, then spread into 3 smaller streams. Ruth realized she had been holding her breath. Mara stood 10 yards behind everyone, both hands tucked beneath her arms. Is it supposed to sound like that? Yes, Owen said. What if it gets wider? Then I make it narrower. What if you can't? Then I charge your mother extra. Mara stared at him. Owen looked over his shoulder. Joke. He doesn't often signal them, Harlan said. Weakness of character. The first visible drop came at the drowned fence. Muddy wire appeared 1 shining inch at a time. Tess crouched and marked the waterline on a post with her pocket knife. If this keeps up, she said, we might see the lane by dark. Cal looked toward the rise where Wade had stood. And what happens when the next storm comes through that cut? Water uses it, Ruth said. I'm asking Owen. Owen shut off the excavator. The sudden quiet made the running water seem louder. Temporary cut needs watching, he said. Banks will soften. If Wednesday brings what they say, I'd open it another foot before the rain, shape the inlet, and add rock. Or fill it back. Cal seized on the last words. You can fill it? Everything can be filled. You've seen how that works. Harlan coughed into one hand, hiding a laugh. Cal's face hardened. I'm trying to understand the options. So is your mother, Owen said. Ruth appreciated the support and resented needing it. She walked closer to the cut. The ground vibrated faintly beneath her boots. On the far side, water spread into the old depression, following a curve no plow line revealed. It bent past a cluster of reeds, widened, and slid toward the south meadow. Fern had been right. Covering the slough had not erased it. The land had waited under every crop, every dry summer, every harvest supper, where Dale congratulated himself on improving the field. Ruth felt no triumph over him, only a tired sadness that arrived too late to become an argument. Evan came beside her. You okay? I am standing in mud watching money run downhill. That a yes? Close enough? He held out a sandwich wrapped in waxed paper. Leona sent ham. I'm not hungry. She said you'd say that. Leona should develop interests. She also said if you didn't eat, I should describe exactly how they put an IV in a dehydrated person. Ruth took the sandwich. She has too many interests. They ate beside the new channel. Evan picked mustard seeds from his bread with a concentration Dale would have considered evidence of poor character. You knew it would work, he said. No. You looked like you knew. I hoped with posture. That's what you did when we were growing up. Ruth looked at him. You'd stand a certain way, Evan said. We thought it meant everything was handled. Sometimes it was. Sometimes the tractor was on fire. Only once, twice. The second time was smoke. Evan smiled. See? Posture. A sharp crack came from the channel. One of the buried fence posts broke free, spun sideways, and lodged between the banks. Water piled against it. Owen moved before anyone spoke. He restarted the excavator, reached with the bucket, and lifted the post clear. The current surged into the opening and tore a bite from the downstream edge. Rock! He shouted. Tess ran toward the loader parked near the east gate. Cal was closer. He climbed into the cab, started it, and drove toward the stone pile before Tess reached the machine. He handled the loader smoothly, though it had been years since Ruth had seen him use one. He brought a full bucket, stopped where Owen signaled, and tipped rock into the eroding edge. Owen shaped it with the excavator. The bank held. Cal reversed up the slope, jaw set, refusing to look at Ruth. He brought 3 more loads. By late afternoon, the cut had settled into a steady flow. Owen shut down the machine and walked the banks with Harlan. Tess measured the water again. Down 6 inches at the fence, she said. At the lane, the top of the culvert's debris mat had emerged. The road crown showed as a thin, muddy island, water moving on both sides. Ruth's house no longer appeared to rise directly from a lake. 2 porch steps were visible. The lilac bush held Dale's gas can only by a single branch. Cal parked the loader and wiped his hands on his jeans. Thank you, Ruth said. It needed doing. Yes. That doesn't mean I agree with this. I know. You're going to need a proper crossing if you keep the channel. Haskell won't touch the frontage with an open ditch through it. He may not. He called me. Ruth waited, set his top number, assume clean access. If the cut stays, he'll revise. Downward. What do you think? I think he arrived with a downward number. Cal looked across the water. It was still a real option. So is fixing the farm. Not if fixing it takes everything you have. Ruth folded the waxed paper from her sandwich into smaller and smaller squares. Is that what this is about? What? What I have. He gave her an exhausted look. Can we not do this now? You brought Haskell here. To help. No. Help carries things in both directions. That man only came to carry something away. Cal's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and walked uphill before answering. I told you Friday, he said, keeping his voice low. After a pause, he said it again. Ruth did not follow him. She did not need to. She knew the sound of a person negotiating for time. Mara approached with 2 pairs of rubber gloves tucked into her back pocket. The restoration company can start tomorrow afternoon. I told you not to authorize them. I didn't. I asked what they would do, what it would cost, and whether removing wet drywall now prevents more damage. Those are questions, not betrayal. Ruth looked at her daughter. Mara's chin lifted. You're not the only person allowed to gather facts. No, Ruth said. I suppose I'm not. They'll give you a written estimate before touching anything. All right, Mara blinked. All right? Don't make me repeat myself. It weakens the experience. A reluctant smile touched her mouth. I'll tell them. Thank you. Mara nodded once, as if gratitude had surprised her more than resistance would have. They left the farm near dusk. Owen parked the excavator on high ground and promised to return before Wednesday's rain. Harlan went home with Tess, complaining that her muffler had worsened during the day. Evan retrieved Dale's gas can from the lilac bush. Cal drove away alone. At Leona's apartment, 6 adults crowded around the table for meatloaf. Ruth sat between Mara and Evan. Tess arrived late after checking the channel and left wet boot prints down the hall. Leona pointed at them. Those floors are older than you. So is the dirt, Tess said. Dirt has better manners. Cal's chair remained empty. Mara sent him 2 messages and then turned her phone face down. Ruth did not ask whether he had answered. She ate meatloaf, potatoes, and half a slice of pie while everyone spoke too loudly about things other than the farm. Evan told a story about a customer who sent back ice cream because it was cold. Owen claimed Harlan once buried a pickup in a ditch and tried to call it a soil test. Leona denied that her second husband had smoked inside the feed store, though Ruth had watched him do it for 12 years. For 20 minutes, laughter fit around the empty chair without hiding it. After the others left, Mara spread the restoration estimate on the kitchen table. Ruth read each line. Water extraction, drywall removal, antimicrobial treatment, disposal. The total was painful but not absurd. They can begin with the mudroom and utility wall, Ruth said. Nothing upstairs without me. Mara wrote that down. You should call the adjuster again. I will. Do you want me to be there? Ruth almost said no. Yes, she said instead. But let me answer first. Mara's pen paused above the paper. Okay. Evan stood at the sink washing plates. His phone played low music from the windowsill. Ruth did not recognize the song, but she liked the steady bass. Cal arrived after 10. Leona had gone to bed. Mara was brushing her teeth. Evan was downstairs checking the store's back door. Ruth sat alone at the table with the estimate and a cup of tea gone cold. Cal entered without knocking, carrying Dale's brass seed company tag. You dropped this, he said. Ruth touched her shirt pocket. At some point, the tag had pulled free from the key ring. He set it beside her cup. Friday, Ruth said. His eyes narrowed. You were listening? You were shouting quietly. He sat across from her and pressed both palms to his face. For a moment, he looked older than Dale had at 60. A commercial customer is 90 days late, he said. My supplier doesn't care. Payroll cleared. The materials account won't. How short? Enough. That is not a number. It's my problem. Then why did you tell Haskell there was a good chance I'd sell? Cal lowered his hands. Shame made him look angry. I thought you would, he said. After the flood, I thought any sane person would. Ruth held his gaze. He looked toward the estimate. I didn't promise him the farm. You promised yourself my answer. He stood so quickly the chair legs scraped the floor. I came to pull you out of that house, he said. Don't turn me into somebody who only came for money. Ruth looked at the brass tag between them. I know why you came, she said. I'm beginning to understand why you stayed. Cal's mouth pulled to one side. That's a nice way of calling me a vulture. If I meant vulture, I'd say vulture. You usually do. I usually haven't needed to. He walked to the window. On the street below, the feed store sign swung in the wind, squeaking every few seconds. Ruth waited. She had learned long ago that Cal filled silence if nobody rescued him from it. 38,000, he said. By Friday? Some Friday. That was mostly theater. And after the materials account. Another customer pays. Summer work picks up. We get through it. You said we. My company gets through it. Ruth rubbed the mark the brass tag had left in the table's condensation. How much do you have coming in? I don't need you doing my books. That was not my offer. You hear one number and your face changes. What does my face do? It starts solving me. The word struck more accurately than she liked. Cal paced to the stove, then back. I shouldn't have called Haskell without asking you. I know that. Yes. I thought if you sold the frontage, I might borrow enough to get clear. From me. He shoved his hands into his pockets. Maybe. You already owe me. That money kept 6 people working. I know what it did. I also know it was a loan. You told me to pay it when I could. You bought a fishing boat the following spring. It was 11 years old. Do old boats cost nothing? I sold it. After 2 years. His face reddened. This is why I don't tell you things. No. You don't tell me things because then I might answer before you have arranged the question. Cal looked at her so sharply she heard Dale's voice before he spoke. You like being needed. Ruth did not move. You complain that everybody comes to you, he continued, but if we don't, you find a way in. You paid Evan's rent without telling him it was you. You stayed at Mara's 5 weeks when she asked for 2. You slipped money into my company and called it temporary. Then years later, you keep a ledger in your head. Those things happened, I know. That's the problem. Everything becomes proof you loved us better than we loved you. Ruth picked up her cold tea. She could not drink it, but holding the cup kept her hands occupied. I never said that. You don't have to. Downstairs, a door closed. Evan's footsteps sounded on the stairs, then stopped, perhaps when he heard voices. Ruth set the cup down. I did like being needed. Cal blinked. It gave me something to do instead of asking whether I was wanted. Her throat tightened, and she disliked that too. But money for your company was still a loan. For 1 second he nearly smiled. It vanished. I'm not asking now. You asked Haskell for me. Cal took his jacket from the chair. Keep the farm, cut ditches through every acre. Just don't act surprised when there's nothing left but water and people who got tired of watching you choose it. He left the brass tag on the table. The outer door slammed. Leona called something from her bedroom about hinges. Evan came into the kitchen in stocking feet. Want me to go after him? No. You want me to pretend I heard none of that? No. Any particular assignment? Ruth pushed the cup away. Go to bed. That one I can do. At the doorway he stopped. He was wrong about one thing. Only one? You don't keep a ledger in your head. Ruth looked at him. You keep it in a red notebook in the desk. She threw a paper napkin at him. He caught it and grinned before disappearing down the hall. The water had fallen below the porch by morning. It left twigs hanging from the lilacs, a crust of silt across the yard, and small silver fish stranded in the tire tracks. Black rows of ruined corn emerged from the south field, bent in the same direction as if bowing toward the reopened slough. Ruth stood at the edge of the porch while the restoration crew carried fans into the house. Their supervisor, a woman named Denise, walked Ruth and Mara through every room before removing anything. Wet drywall to here, Denise said, drawing a pencil line below the mudroom window. Utility wall higher because insulation wicketed up. Cabinets? Ruth asked. Lower boxes are swollen. We can remove the doors and see what dries. Do that first. Denise nodded and wrote it down. Mara did not speak for Ruth once. When the crew asked about Dale's recliner, she looked at her mother. Take it, Ruth said. The men carried the chair sideways through the front door. Water dripped from one arm. Mara peeled off the blue discard label before it went into the truck. You didn't have to do that, Ruth said. I know. They stood together as the recliner disappeared behind the metal door. Dale had slept in it during his last months because lying flat made him cough. Ruth had slept on the sofa beside him, waking whenever his breathing changed. He apologized exactly once, at 4 in the morning, then complained that she had tucked the blanket too tightly. When the truck door slammed, Ruth felt less grief than relief. She did not say so. The adjuster arrived after lunch, a polite young man who photographed everything twice and promised very little. The flood endorsement would cover some contents and cleanup. The furnace depended on whether the damage came from surface water or rising groundwater. Ruth asked how water beneath a flooded house was expected to identify itself. He smiled as if trained for the question. Mara wrote down every answer. When he left, she had 3 pages of notes and a headache. "How do people do this alone?" she asked. "Poorly. You would have. I have you." Mara looked up. Ruth pretended to examine the warped mudroom cabinet. Outside, Tess and Harlan marked the old slope with orange flags. The route looked absurd at first, a crooked line crossing the clean geometry of planted rows. Then Ruth climbed onto the farm lane and saw how naturally the flags connected the shallow places. Owen stood beside the temporary cut. The water had dropped from a forceful stream to a steady run. "Field's down almost 2 feet, Tess said. The house? Standing water's gone from the crawl space." Owen prodded the rock with a shovel. Cut held. "Banks are soft." "What would permanent look like?" Ruth asked. Cal's accusation returned. "Dad filled the ditch, so now you have to tear it open." She pushed it aside. The question mattered even if he had found the ugliest reason she might ask it. Owen pointed along the flags. "Broader than this. Shallow sides you can mow. Let it spread into the meadow rather than making one fast shoot. Farm lane needs a proper crossing, or you give up driving through here." "How many acres?" Tess answered. 17 if we follow the old wet line. Closer to 18 if we leave a buffer. Ruth looked at her. "Your best guess?" 18. "And the remaining ground?" "Drains better, but we lose a clean planting block. More turning, more edges." "You're not trying to make it sound pretty." "I'm trying to farm it." Harlan pushed an orange flag deeper with his boot. "That's why you ask a farmer." Ruth walked the proposed channel. Mud pulled at her boots. In places, dying corn stood shoulder high. In others, the current had laid it flat and covered the stalks with silt. 18 acres was not a romantic sacrifice. It was seed they would not buy, grain they would not sell, rent Ruth would not collect. It was the piece of land Wade valued most because a broad, curving floodway made poor access for trucks. It was also where the water had gone before they ordered it elsewhere. Tess joined her by the sycamore. Its trunk showed a fresh water line. "I can revise the lease," Ruth said. "You don't have to decide that today. You asked what happens. I asked before the cut worked. And now?" Tess studied the flags. "Now, I think planting through here again would be an argument with evidence." Ruth smiled. "Fern would have liked you. I've heard that wasn't always a compliment. It was never only one thing." Tess nudged a clod of mud with her boot. "If we give up 18, I'd want to change the rotation on the edges. Hay where equipment turns badly. Maybe stop fighting the wet corner by the cottonwoods. That's more acres. 3 poor ones. Poor is still rent. Drowned is scenery." They walked on. Evan spent the afternoon cleaning Dale's tools on the porch. He lined wrenches across old towels, wiped each one with oil, and made separate piles for salvage and rust. "You know what half those are?" Ruth asked. "No. You're organizing them. I know what shapes are." Dale's wooden toolbox sat open at his feet. One hinge had pulled loose, and the bottom was stained dark. Evan lifted a long wrench. "This? Pipe wrench? This? Also a pipe wrench." Why did he need 6? He didn't trust the first 5. Evan set it in the salvage pile. "I'm going back Thursday." Ruth had known he would leave. The knowledge still caught. "Restaurant need you?" "I'm on the schedule Friday. Apparently food continues. You've missed work already. My boss owes me. Money, mostly apologies." Ruth sat beside him. "Take whichever tools you want." He wiped oil from his fingers. "I don't want Dad's tools. You've spent 3 hours saving them. That's different." "How?" He considered the wrench in his lap. "I don't want him deciding what I inherit." Ruth understood that, better than she wanted to. Rain began after dark, light enough at first to tick against Leona's windows. The forecast had moved the heavier weather north, but Ruth lay awake listening. At 1, she dressed quietly and drove to the farm. She told herself she was checking the house fans. The channel shone in her headlights. Water moved faster than it had at sunset, carrying leaves and pieces of stalk. Near the inlet, a broken branch had lodged against the rock. Debris gathered behind it. Ruth took a rake from the machine shed. The mud reached above her ankles. She stayed on the bank and extended the rake, catching the branch on the second try. It shifted, but did not release. She pulled harder. The branch came free all at once. The rake jerked forward. Ruth's left boot slid from beneath her, and she struck the bank on her shoulder. Pain flashed through her wrist. For several seconds, she lay in cold mud while rain touched her face. The current caught the rake and carried it through the cut. Ruth watched its wooden handle vanish into the dark. The first thing Ruth did was move her fingers. They moved, which was encouraging. The second thing she did was try to stand, which was not. Her left wrist folded beneath her before she got one knee under herself. She rolled onto her back and looked up at the rain. It was not even a respectable rain, only a cold drizzle that seemed embarrassed to find her lying there. "Well," she told the sky, "you've made your point." The sky declined to specify what the point was. She waited until the sharp pain settled into a heavy pulse, then turned onto her right side. The bank was slick, but the rock Owen had placed gave her something solid to brace against. She rose in stages, knees, one boot, the other. Mud dragged at her clothes. Her left arm hung useless against her stomach. The channel ran cleanly now that the branch was gone. Ruth watched it for one bitter second before walking toward the truck. Her phone sat beneath the folded map in the glove compartment. She considered driving to Leona's. The truck was automatic. One hand would be enough. She could wash, change, and decide in the morning whether her wrist required attention. Then she tried to turn the key. Pain shot to her elbow so hard her vision narrowed. Ruth sat back, breathing through her teeth. Evan's name was fourth in her recent calls, beneath Tess, the insurance adjuster, and a recorded message from Wade Haskell she had not played. She pressed it. He answered before the first full ring. "Mom, I need help." Silence. Not confusion, not sleep. The shocked silence of a man hearing unfamiliar words. "Where are you?" "At the farm." "What happened?" "I fell." "I'm coming. Bring boots." He disconnected. 12 minutes later, headlights swung across the rise. Evan came down the lane in Mara's car, stopped at the water, and got out wearing restaurant clogs and no coat. Mara stepped out of the passenger side in a raincoat over her pajamas. "I told you boots," Ruth said. Evan stared at the mud coating her from shoulder to ankle. "I told Mara you fell. I heard the betrayal in the plural headlights." Mara crossed the wet ground with both hands raised, as if approaching a nervous animal. "Where do you hurt?" "Wrist. Head? No." "Did you hit it?" "No." "Are you sure?" "I remain familiar with its location." Mara took off her raincoat and wrapped it around Ruth's shoulders. "We're going to urgent care. At 2 a.m? That is why they put urgent in the name." Evan helped Ruth into the back seat. He did not comment when she used his forearm to lower herself, or when she gasped after bumping her wrist against the door. Mara drove. In the front seat, Evan kept turning around to make sure Ruth remained there. The clinic's waiting room television showed a man selling non-stick cookware. Ruth sat beneath fluorescent lights in muddy jeans, while Mara completed a form and asked questions Ruth could have answered herself. "She's not allergic to penicillin," Ruth said. Mara looked up. "I know. Then why did you pause?" "I was reading the next line." You paused suspiciously. Evan brought a towel from the car and draped it over Ruth's knees. "Can you two postpone this until after the cookware?" The x-ray showed a small fracture near Ruth's wrist, the kind the clinician called stable and Ruth called inconvenient. They put her in a rigid splint, told her not to lift, push, pull, dig, drive, or do anything else that described a normal day on the farm. 6 weeks, Ruth said. "If healing looks good." "What if I'm a fast healer?" The clinician smiled. "Then it will look good in 6 weeks." On the way out, Evan carried the paper bag containing her muddy shirt. Mara carried the discharge papers. Ruth carried nothing. She disliked the arrangement intensely. Leona was waiting at the top of the stairs with every light on. She looked at the splint, then at Ruth's face. "I'm going to bed," Leona said. Ruth nodded. "In the morning, I'll call you an idiot. I appreciate the appointment. Rest up." Mara helped Ruth change into a nightgown. Ruth allowed help with the buttons after 3 failed attempts, and no conversation about it. When Mara pulled the blanket over her, Ruth caught her daughter's wrist. "You were right. Mara sat on the edge of the bed. About what? Going alone? I wasn't there to be right. I know. What were you thinking? That the branch needed moving. At 1 in the morning. That was when it was there. Mara made a small, helpless noise. You could have called Tess, or Owen, or us. You would have told me not to go. Yes, that is why I didn't. Mara looked hurt, then angry, then too tired for either. You think asking for help means surrendering the decision. Ruth released her wrist. It doesn't, Mara said. You can be the person in charge and still tell somebody where you are. Is that how you felt when I stayed after your surgery? Mara's eyes shifted. You asked me for 2 weeks, Ruth said. I needed help. You needed some help. I stayed until you were hiding your grocery list. I didn't know how to make you leave without sounding ungrateful. There it was, one of Ruth's practical kindnesses, viewed from the other side. I'm sorry, Ruth said. Mara smoothed the blanket near Ruth's knee. You did make good soup. I can apologize and cook. I know. It's your whole thing. Ruth laughed, then winced because the movement shook her wrist. Mara turned off the lamp. Ruth woke late to the smell of coffee and the deep ache of rain-bruised joints. Her splint rested on top of the blanket like an accusation. Downstairs, Evan was arguing with Leona about eggs. They're brown on the bottom, he said. That's flavor. That's carbon. You charge people $20 for smaller eggs. We don't burn them. You put green leaves beside them and turn the lights down. Ruth entered the kitchen. Both stopped. Leona pointed at a chair. Sit down, idiot. You said morning. It's almost noon. I extended the appointment. Evan set a plate in front of Ruth. His eggs were soft, yellow, and covered with chopped herbs Leona claimed not to own. Where's Mara? Farm, he said. Restoration crew came at 8. She said not to wake you. Ruth reached for the fork with her right hand. Who told Tess? Everybody knows? I was on the ground 12 minutes. You called an Alvarez in a county with telephones. Leona poured coffee. Harlan says the channel held. Owen says the inlet needs widening so branches don't bridge it. Tess found your rake. Where? Halfway across the meadow. It was a good rake. Apparently it travels well. Ruth looked at Evan. I need to go out there. You can't drive? You can. I'm supposed to leave today. What time? After lunch. Then take me first. Evan opened his mouth. I will sit. I will not lift, push, pull, dig, wrestle wildlife, or enter a boat. Leona said, add lying to the list. That wasn't on the clinic paper. At the farm, 2 industrial fans roared inside the mudroom. The lower drywall had been removed in neat strips, exposing studs and dark insulation. Mara stood with Denise, comparing the work to the estimate. She saw Ruth and glanced at the splint. You're supposed to rest. I rested nearly 8 hours. It was dreadful. Denise smiled. Your daughter made sure we didn't touch the upstairs. She learns quickly. Mara looked pleased before remembering she was angry. On the porch, Dale's clean tools lay in closed plastic bins. Evan had saved more than he discarded. The wooden toolbox sat empty, drying in the sun. Tess came from the field, carrying Ruth's rake. Its handle was scarred, but unbroken. I washed it, she said. Thank you. I considered putting a bell on it. Ruth took the rake with her right hand. Tess did not let go. You are not using this. I own it. You may visit it. Tess leaned the rake against the porch, well out of Ruth's reach. Owen had widened the test cut by another foot. Instead of a narrow chute, the inlet now curved gently between the orange flags. The light rain had raised the water only an inch, and the banks showed no fresh erosion. Ruth stood on the lane while Tess explained what had been done. She forced herself not to interrupt, except twice. When can you plant what's left? Ruth asked. Not soon. Ground has to carry equipment. Some acres are done for the year. And the lease? We'll work it out. That is what people say when they plan to be polite at their own expense. Tess folded her arms. I'm trying not to negotiate with an injured woman. My wrist is injured. My arithmetic is intact. We'll sit down next week, with figures. Mara joined them, holding Ruth's phone. Wade Haskell called again. Did he leave a message? He said the revised offer expires tomorrow. Play it. The number was lower by nearly a third. Wade cited altered access, drainage uncertainty, and the visible channel through the frontage. He finished by saying he hoped Ruth would make the practical choice. Evan arrived as the message ended. Cal did not. Ruth pressed the screen and called Wade. He answered warmly. I got your offer, she said. Good. I believe it's fair under the circumstances. I believe it's yours to keep. A pause. Mrs. Mercer, emotions are high right now. My daughter is here, so I have a witness that my arithmetic remains functional. Mara's eyebrows rose. The offer expires tomorrow, Wade said. Then it has a shorter life than most bad ideas. She ended the call. Evan laughed. Tess looked toward the field to hide a smile. Mara handed the phone back. You could have made a counteroffer, she said. Did you think I should? No. Mara exhaled. But I wanted you to ask me. Ruth looked at her daughter. Next time, she said. Mara nodded. Next time. Evan carried his bag to the car. Before getting in, he returned to the porch and took one of Dale's pipe wrenches from the salvage bin. Thought you didn't want his tools, Ruth said. I don't. He weighed it in his hand. This one opens the stuck gas valve at the restaurant. Your father would hate that. That improves it. Ruth hugged him awkwardly with her good arm. He held on longer than she expected. Call before you fall next time. I will try to schedule it. That is not what I said. No, Ruth whispered. I know. After his car disappeared, the farm seemed too quiet despite the fans. Ruth sat in a folding chair while Tess moved the orange flags farther apart, marking the wider path a permanent slough would need. For once, Ruth could not carry, measure, or fix anything. She could only watch other people work on her ground. It felt less like helplessness than she had feared. It felt like discovering that the work continued even when it was not held entirely in her hands. The feeling lasted until Mara tried to move the kitchen table. That stays by the window, Ruth said. It has to move while they replace the floor. Then it goes into the front room. The front room is full of cabinets. Those cabinets were supposed to stay in the kitchen. They cannot replace the floor under cabinets that stay in the kitchen. Ruth sat in her folding chair, with her splinted wrist propped against her chest. People replaced floors before cabinets learned to travel. Mara leaned both hands on the table. Would you like to call Denise and explain your stationary cabinet method? No. Would you like the table to remain in the front yard? No. Then may I move it 6 feet? Ruth narrowed her eyes. You're enjoying this. More than I should. Together, Mara and one of the restoration workers carried the table into the mudroom. Ruth was not allowed to lift an end. She followed them and pointed out a nail protruding from the doorframe, which restored a small amount of order to the universe. The house came apart in clean layers. Drywall left first, then insulation, swollen cabinet boxes, warped flooring, and the dead furnace. Every removal exposed another choice. Ruth spent mornings at the farm answering questions and afternoons above the feed store, learning how many tasks required 2 hands. Leona buttoned Ruth's cuffs without comment. Mara opened jars. Tess drove her to appointments and made her sit in the truck while checking the fields. Ruth became skilled at carrying objects beneath her right arm and opening doors with her hip. The brace remained stiff. Ruth's habits bent slowly. She and Tess worked on the revised lease at Leona's kitchen table. Tess arrived with crop maps, expense figures, and a yellow legal pad. Ruth brought her red notebook. Evan had been right about the notebook. He called during their second meeting and laughed so loudly when Tess told him it was open that Ruth moved the phone away from her ear. I knew it, he said. Go cook something. I am. We're using the pipe wrench tonight. For plumbing? Duck press. Your father has begun spinning. That's renewable energy. Ruth hung up before he could become more pleased with himself. Tess tapped the map. 18 acres out of production, 3 more converted to hay. That lowers cash rent. By 18 acres, 21. Hay is production. Hay margins won't yield like corn. They also won't require the same input, or bring the same return. Ruth looked over her glasses. You came here to reduce your rent. You chose very persuasive figures. I learned from the woman who once charged me interest because I was 3 days late. You were 33 days late. The check was 3 days late. I spent 30 days warning you. Ruth almost smiled. 18 acres out, 3.5 rent for 2 years, while we see what hay does. Tess studied the figures. And channel maintenance? We split ordinary upkeep. Structural work is mine. Flood damage? Depends whose foolishness causes it. That is not a standard clause. It should be. They settled on language plain enough that neither needed a lawyer to translate dinner conversation. The agreement cost Ruth income. It also kept Tess on land she understood, and gave both of them a reason to make the altered farm work. When Ruth signed with her right hand, the letters looked like they belonged to a nervous stranger. The signature is ugly, she said. It remains legally bossy. The damaged corn dried gray across the fields. On hot afternoons, the smell reached the road. Tess mowed what she could, but some ground stayed too soft for machinery. Weeds rose through silt. The farm looked abandoned from one direction and furiously occupied from another. Owen returned with a larger excavator, after the temporary cut proved stable through 2 ordinary rains. Harlan marked the channel's wider curves and argued with him about slope. They measured twice, then a third time, because Harlan distrusted even numbers that agreed. Ruth approved the permanent work in sections. The full cost made her stomach tighten. Insurance covered more cleanup than she expected, and less of everything that mattered. The furnace settlement paid barely half its replacement. Nothing arrived as rescue. To cover the channel and house repairs without touching every dollar she had, Ruth agreed to sell the combine, an unused grain cart, and 2 implements Dale had refused to part with. The combine had taken water and had not run properly before it did. Its auction price was disappointing, but real. Cal did not attend the inspection. He had stopped calling after Ruth rejected Wade's offer. Mara said he was working long days. Evan said Cal had answered one text with a thumbs up, which in Mercer language could mean gratitude, fury, or accidental pressure on the screen. Ruth did not chase him. Every day she resisted calling felt both cruel and necessary. On auction morning, the machinery stood in a row along the dry edge of the north field. Mud stained the combine's tires halfway up. Men opened panels, checked hours, and spoke about repairs as if Ruth were not standing there. The auctioneer Cal had first contacted handled the sale. He was fair, brisk, and careful to confirm every lot with Ruth. When the combine started, it coughed black smoke and settled into a rough idle. The sound brought Dale back more vividly than the photograph had. He stood in the yard cursing a belt, his cap backward, one hand black with grease. Ruth could almost feel the thermos she used to carry out to him. The bidding ended below her private hope and above her private fear. Afterward, Ruth sat on the tailgate of Tess's truck while the buyer drove the combine toward a trailer. It looked enormous leaving and left an equally enormous empty place. Tess offered her coffee. "I don't want comfort in a paper cup," Ruth said. "It's bad coffee. I brought it for realism." Ruth accepted it. The combine reached the rise. A pickup turned in from the road and blocked its path. Cal got out. He spoke to the driver, guided the trailer backward, and cleared enough room for the combine to pass. Then he stood watching it leave. His work shirt was stained beneath the arms, and he had lost weight in the face. Ruth waited. He came down the lane after the auctioneer drove away. "You sold it cheap," he said. "It was worth what somebody paid. Hydraulic system alone could have brought more parted out. You could have told me. You could have called." "I did. Twice. I mean, before the auction." Ruth held the paper cup between her knees. "You arranged the auctioneer before I agreed to an auction. And now, you used him?" "He was good." Cal glanced toward Tess, who took the hint and walked toward the machine shed. "What are you selling next?" he asked. "Nothing presently." "Northfield? No. House? No. Just checking which decisions count as practical when you make them." Ruth set the coffee down. "How is the company? Still open? Supplier?" "Gave me 30 days. I stopped taking a paycheck." "Let one technician go. I'm sorry." "He'll find work. I meant you too." Cal kicked dried mud from a tire. "Haskell would still buy if you filled the cut." "I won't. I told him that." Ruth looked up. "He called me after you rejected him. I said to stop calling. Thank you." "Don't." Cal's jaw tightened. "It wasn't for you." His revised number was insulting. 2 motives can fit in one decision. "Is that from your new collection of flood wisdom?" "No." "Experience with your father." Cal looked toward the orange flag stretching across the lower field. "How much of the auction money goes into that? Most, and the rest?" "Furnace and cabinets. You could loan me 20. There it was, not described around the edges, not placed where Ruth could volunteer to pick it up. $20,000 spoken between them. "No," she said. Cal's face went pale, then red. "You didn't even think." "I have thought about it every day since you said 38. 20 gets me through until receivables clear. And if they don't, they will. Then a bank can loan against them. Bank sees the late supplier account. So do I." He took one step backward. "I have never missed payroll. I know. I have men depending on me. I know that too. You'd rather pour the money into a ditch. I would rather use it for the emergency it came from. This is an emergency. It is yours. The words hurt him. Ruth saw it and did not pretend otherwise. Cal laughed once, without amusement. You finally learned boundaries right when I needed a mother. I have been your mother every day. No, you've been a bookkeeper, a nurse, a cook, a lender. Now you've found a tenant to play family with. And suddenly the rest of us are parasites. Tess lost a crop on my ground. Keeping her farm viable keeps my farm viable. Of course it does. Everything comes back to this place. This place is under my feet, Cal. Where would you like it to go? I'd like you to choose your son over 18 wet acres. I gave you money before. It did not become choosing you just because you spent it. His eyes hardened, selfish. Ruth felt the word enter the same old place where she had stored every accusation she could disprove by doing more. This time, she left it unanswered. Cal looked toward the south field. Dad would have filled that cut. Yes, and you would have helped him. Ruth's broken wrist throbbed inside the brace. Yes, she said. I did. The agreement knocked some of the anger out of him. He glanced at her, uncertain what to strike next. Ruth stood carefully. I will sit down with your accounts. I'll help call the customers who owe you. I'll help you work out what can wait and what can't. I will not give you the channel money. I don't need my mother calling my customers. Then my offer is no. Cal returned to his pickup without saying goodbye. The larger excavator arrived the next morning. Ruth stood beside Tess as Owen lowered the bucket into corn ground that had produced a crop almost every year since Dale filled it. The first scoop lifted black soil, roots, and pale fragments of old clay from the buried slough. There was no rush of water this time. The field had already drained. The machine simply removed what Ruth and Dale had once put there. She had expected satisfaction. Instead, as the old curve opened yard by yard, Ruth grieved the good ground, the wasted money, the husband who had been wrong, and the younger woman who helped him because peace seemed cheaper. Tess stood close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither called the new channel a victory. The excavator's path became a brown seam through the field. Owen shaped the banks broad enough to mow and shallow enough that a person could walk out if the mud allowed. Harlan followed with his cane, checking the grade as though the machine might sneak an uphill section past him. Tess drove stakes where the wet meadow would begin and removed the old fence instead of replacing what the flood had laid down. The farm lane created the hardest choice. A crossing large enough for equipment and floodwater would consume money Ruth needed inside the house. A cheap culvert would repeat the mistake beneath a newer layer of gravel. Go around, Ruth decided. Tess studied the route along the field edge. Adds 12 minutes with the planter. Your time, my fuel, my road, your rent. They stared at each other. 6 minutes each way, Tess said. Now you're negotiating with a clock. I came with figures. Ruth closed the farm lane at the old slough and shifted equipment access to the higher south entrance. Owen used some of the excavated soil to strengthen that approach without blocking the meadow. What had once been a straight drive from the machine shed became a long curve around the lower ground. Dale would have hated it. The knowledge bothered Ruth less every day. The channel reached the meadow before the splint came off her wrist. When the clinician finally replaced it with a removable brace, Ruth flexed her hand and announced that 6 weeks had been an exaggeration. You still have restrictions, the clinician said. Smaller exaggerations. No lifting over 5 pounds for 2 more weeks. Ruth looked at Mara. Do not memorize that. I wrote it down. Of course you did. Mara had driven her to the appointment without assuming she would. She asked the night before, then arrived 10 minutes early and waited in the car instead of coming upstairs to hurry Ruth. It was such a deliberate performance of restraint that Ruth loved her for it and wanted to shake her. On the drive home, Mara said, "The cleaning service can start Friday. I can clean. You can also climb onto the roof. Ability is not the entire question. The house has fewer walls. It should be easier. The walls are back. Most of them. Every other Friday, 2 hours, floors and bathrooms." Ruth watched soybean fields past the window. The new cabinets had consumed more of her budget than expected, despite being plain maple with ordinary handles. Fine dust settled daily on every repaired surface. Her wrist ached after sweeping one room. "Not my bedroom," she said. Mara kept her eyes on the road. "I'll tell them. And they use my vacuum. They bring their own. I have attachments. Mom, every other Friday. Mara smiled. Every other Friday. Ruth moved home 3 days later. Leona packed her things into feed sacks because she claimed suitcases encouraged people to stay. The rescued photograph of Ruth and Dale went into one sack, the red notebook into another, and the brass seed company tag into Ruth's purse. At the bottom of the stairs, Leona held out the new toothbrush. "You own this," she said. "I don't want it. I refuse to become one of those women with a drawer full of other people's dental history." Ruth put it in her purse. "Call if the house smells strange. The house does smell strange. Stranger." Ruth hugged her. Leona endured it for 3 seconds, then patted Ruth's back hard enough to move her toward the door. The farmhouse no longer looked exactly like itself. The mudroom walls were a cleaner white than the older rooms. The new furnace hummed instead of rattling. The kitchen cabinets had soft, close hinges Ruth distrusted because doors ought to admit when they were being shut. Dale's recliner was gone. The empty space by the window remained empty. Mara wanted to put a reading chair there. Ruth said she was still deciding. After 2 weeks, she realized the decision was to leave the space open. Evan came for one night between restaurant shifts. He brought 3 bottles of wine, a bag of groceries, and the pipe wrench. "The duck press survived," he said, setting the wrench on the counter. "Then, why return it? It weighs 9 pounds and reminds me of Dad. You took it for that reason. I took it because it annoyed him. Turns out that's not a long-term decorating scheme." Ruth placed it with the other clean tools. Evan cooked chicken in a skillet and swore at the soft, close drawer when it shut before he finished reaching inside. They ate at the table by the window. Outside, the new slough reflected the sunset in a thin copper line. "It looks intentional," he said. "It was. You know what I mean." "I do." He turned his wineglass by the stem. Cal didn't answer me. Me either. Mara says his company is still going. Smaller. He'll come around. Maybe. Evan waited for her to improve the answer. Ruth did not. "Are you okay with that?" he asked. No. The honesty seemed to satisfy him more than reassurance would have. When Tess planted late hay along the channel margins, Ruth rode beside her in the tractor. The field no longer accepted the old straight rows. Tess had to lift the implement at each curve and make shorter passes around the wet ground. "This is annoying," Tess said. "You told me it would be. I wanted you to understand I was right. I understood the first time. I simply chose to proceed in an atmosphere of disagreement." Near the meadow, Tess stopped the tractor. The excavated channel widened into sedges and flattened grass. Small frogs had appeared in the damp edges. Ruth could hear them beneath the engine. "Corn won't grow there," she said. "That is the correct agricultural analysis. Dale would point out every lost bushel. He isn't paying for seed." Ruth looked across the surviving acreage. Some corn had recovered enough to form thin ears. Much had not. The crop would be poor. Next year might be better, but the farm's income had changed permanently. "We should diversify the north field," Tess said. "Less corn on the lowest rows, more hay. Maybe winter wheat if the fall stays dry." "You hate winter wheat. I hate losing money more. Good basis for partnership." The word came out before Ruth examined it. Tess looked at her. Partnership? Working partnership, not ownership. Don't start measuring curtains. I rent a house. People still get ambitious. Tess smiled. Working partnership. They shook hands across the tractor console, Ruth's grip weaker than usual, but no longer painful. Harlan came out twice a week to inspect the channel. He claimed retirement required projects that did not know he had retired. He and Ruth sat beneath the sycamore while Tess worked. "You put it back close," he said one afternoon. "Close isn't exact, water isn't sentimental." Fern was? Fern was mean. She could be. She was also right. They often traveled together with her. Harlan watched a trickle disappear into the meadow. Dale knew, later. Ruth turned. Knew what? That the lane was trouble. After the 2008 flood, he had me price a bigger crossing. He never told me. Didn't like the price. That sounds like him. Said he'd get to it next year. That sounded like him too. Ruth waited for anger and found only weariness. There would always be one more thing Dale had considered but not said, loved but not admitted, understood but postponed. She could spend the rest of her life translating him, or let some sentences remain unfinished. She let this one. The first harvest after the flood barely deserved the name. Tess combined the surviving corn on the north ground using a rented machine. The yield monitor displayed numbers so low she accused it of being judgmental. Ruth cooked supper for everyone who helped. Tess, Leona, Owen, Harlan, Mara, and Evan, who drove down after his shift and slept 4 hours on Ruth's sofa before setting the table. Ruth placed one more chair beside Mara. Cal's chair remained empty. Mara did not ask whether to remove it. Evan poured wine into the glass in front of it, then quietly poured that wine into Ruth's when she was not looking. They ate roast beef, green beans, and potatoes in the repaired kitchen. Owen told the same story about Harlan's buried pickup. Harlan corrected details nobody cared about. Leona complained that the new cabinet doors lacked conviction. The empty chair hurt without controlling the meal. After supper, Ruth wrapped leftovers and put Cal's portion in the freezer. She did not call him. Rain began again 11 days later. Not the scattered autumn showers Tess wanted, but a slow tropical system moving north through the Mississippi Valley. Forecast totals changed every few hours, 4 inches, then 6, then possibly 8 over already damp ground. Ruth stood on the porch while the first drops darkened the steps. Tess drove up and handed her a printed forecast. Creek could reach spring level. It won't. You hoping with posture? Ruth glanced at her. Evan taught me that. I regret introducing you. They walked the channel before the rain strengthened. Summer grass covered the banks. Owen's rock remained firm at the inlet. The slough bottom was wet, but clear, except for fallen leaves and one branch small enough for Tess to remove with a hook. Ruth stayed 6 feet back. Growth, Tess said. Mockery is not encouragement. I contain multitudes, Mara called while they reached the sycamore. I'm coming down, she said. Roads may close. That is why I am coming before they do. I don't need evacuation. I didn't say evacuation. I said I'm coming. Ruth looked at the dark southern sky. Bring batteries. I already bought them. Of course you did. By evening, the creek had spread into the lowest meadow. The reopened slough began filling from the south, accepting water gently instead of pulling it through a single narrow cut. Mara arrived with batteries, bottled water, soup, flashlights, and no housing brochures. She placed everything in the mudroom and asked where Ruth wanted it. Kitchen counter, Ruth said. They slept upstairs while rain hammered the roof. At 3 in the morning, Ruth woke to the old sound of water against the porch. She put on boots and went downstairs. Mara followed without being called. The porch light showed brown water crossing the yard, carrying stalks and leaves. It covered the bottom step and rose toward the second. For one terrible moment, the farm looked exactly as it had the night Ruth fled to the grain truck. Then she saw the current. Instead of settling flat across the south field, the water was moving toward the sycamore, where the restored slough waited in the dark. The water reached the sycamore in a broad sheet, divided around its trunk, and gathered in the long curve Owen had cut. Mara stood beside Ruth on the porch in a raincoat and bedroom slippers. It's going in, she said. Some of it. Is that enough? Ruth could not answer. The slough was taking water, but more kept coming from the north fields. Rain struck the yard hard enough to flatten the surface between gusts. The creek had erased the lower meadow from sight. She called Tess. I'm at the south entrance, Tess shouted over the rain. Meadow's full. Banks, holding where I can see. Water spreading like it's supposed to. Stay out of the channel. There was a brief silence. Ruth. What? I'm sitting in my truck. Good. Because we have established which one of us needs that instruction. Mara nodded approvingly. Ruth turned away from her. Call if the south road goes under. It will. Call before. Tess disconnected. The porch light flickered. Ruth looked toward the new breaker panel in the mudroom. The electrician had raised the vulnerable connections after the flood, and the furnace sat on a concrete base 6 inches higher than the old one. 6 inches had seemed sensible when the floor was dry. Now it looked like an argument made by a ruler. We should shut off the furnace, Mara said. It's not cold. That isn't why. I know. Ruth turned it off at the thermostat. Mara went upstairs for dry shoes and returned wearing Ruth's old rubber boots. They were 2 sizes too large and slapped against her calves. You look ridiculous, Ruth said. I'm prepared for somebody else's feet. They moved bottled water and flashlights onto the kitchen table. Ruth placed the photograph of herself and Dale on top of the refrigerator, then felt foolish. If water reached that high, the picture would be the least of their troubles. Headlights appeared on the rise. Who is that? Mara asked. The vehicle stopped where the lane dipped into water. A figure got out, pulled on chest waders, and began walking toward the house. Ruth recognized Cal's shape before she saw his face. Mara looked at her phone. I texted both of them. You did not mention that. I gathered facts and notified interested parties. You are becoming unpleasant. I had excellent instruction. Cal reached the porch carrying a waterproof tool case over one shoulder. Water streamed from his jacket. Road closes behind me. I'm staying here, he said. You have a room, Ruth replied. He looked past her toward the field. How high? Bottom of the second step. Creek gauge? Tess says the meadow's full. That isn't a gauge. It's the measurement we have. Cal entered the mudroom and set down the tool case. He checked the breaker panel, the furnace disconnect, and the outlets nearest the floor. Ruth led him. This was his work, and asking him to stand aside would have been pride dressed as authority. The new panel's fine, he said. If water reaches the mudroom, we cut the main. It won't, Mara said. Cal looked at her. She's hoping with posture, Ruth said. Mara pointed at her mother. That. Cal almost smiled. Then he saw the water through the kitchen window. You opened the whole route? 18 acres. And no crossing. Tess goes around. That's a long haul. 6 minutes. 12. They negotiated, Mara said. Cal took off his wet jacket. I bet they did. The three of them stood in the repaired kitchen, listening to rain hit the roof. Nobody mentioned the empty chair at harvest, the unanswered calls, or the $20,000 Ruth had refused to lend him. The storm gave them ordinary tasks, which was the Mercer family's oldest method of remaining in one room. Cal found towels and rolled them against the mudroom threshold. Mara filled the bathtub because Leona had told her to, though none of them knew what purpose the stored water would serve if the well failed. Ruth made coffee. At 4, Evan called from his restaurant. I'm closing early and driving down, he said. No, Ruth told him. I can leave in an hour. The interstate is flooding west of you. I checked. Then you checked badly. Stay there. What's happening? The slough is moving water. Is it working? Yes. So far. Are you sure? No. He was silent. Kitchen sounds surrounded him through the phone. Metal pans, running water, someone calling his name. Cal there? He asked. Ruth glanced across the room. Cal was kneeling by the mudroom wall, checking the bottom electrical box with a flashlight. Yes. That good? It is presently useful. Tell Mara to send pictures. I can hear you, Mara called. Send pictures. The call ended after Ruth promised twice not to go into the field. She handed the phone to Mara before he could ring again. Near dawn, the water climbed halfway over the second step. The slough had become visible even in darkness, a faster ribbon across the field marked by foam. Instead of striking the new channel head-on, runoff spread along its shallow banks and entered from several points. The water widened toward the meadow, losing its force as it went. Still, the yard continued filling. Cal stood under the porch roof with his arms folded. Creek may be backing into it. It is, Ruth said. Then where does the water go? The meadow first, creek when it falls. So we're holding it, giving it room, same water, different place. He looked toward the lower ground, invisible beneath rain. You always have an answer for the farm. No, I have an answer for that question. Mara went inside to check the coffee. Cal stayed beside Ruth. I sold a van, he said. She waited. Oldest service van, canceled the warehouse lease and moved inventory into the shop. Supplier took $12,000 in a payment schedule. That was good. It was ugly. Those can be the same. He rested his hands on the porch rail. Rainwater dripped from his hair. I kept waiting for you to call again. I wanted to. Why didn't you? Because wanting to solve you is not the same as helping. Cal gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. You and Mara go to therapy while I was gone? No. She moved a table. He looked at her. It was significant at the time. The current tugged a section of old fence loose. 2 posts leaned, then vanished. Cal watched them go. I shouldn't have called Haskell, he said. No. I thought after Dad died, we'd sell eventually. You thought eventually meant when you needed it. His shoulders tightened. There you go. It is what happened. I'm standing here admitting I was wrong about calling him, not about believing my life could be converted into your solution. Cal turned from the rail. And you still think this is about me wanting you dead so I can get the money. I never said that. You didn't have to. Ruth heard his echo of the night at Leona's, when he had accused her of proving love through a ledger. The same wound passed across the table and returned in different words. "I know you came because you were frightened for me," she said. "Do you?" "Yes. I also know you stayed because the sale could help you. Both things fit. Convenient. Painful." He rubbed rain from his face. "You make everything sound reasonable after you've decided. I learned from years of making your father sound reasonable before he had." The words quieted him. Ruth looked toward the slough. "I'm sorry for teaching you I would always fill the hole. Money, paperwork, a customer you didn't want to call. I made being needed easier than letting you be angry with me. You're doing fine with that now. I have more practice." Cal leaned back against the house. "The company might still fail." "I know. You could stop that." "No. I could delay it. Maybe. And spend the money that keeps the house livable and the farm draining." There it is again. The farm wins. You and the farm are not in a contest. Feels like one from here. Then you are standing in the wrong place. He stared at her. Ruth did not soften the sentence, but she did not turn away from him either. Cal's voice dropped. "You offered Tess a partnership. A working partnership. Mara told me. Mara should develop fewer communication skills. Is she getting the farm?" The question was raw enough to embarrass them both. "Tess is farming the farm," Ruth said. "You said you didn't want it. That's not an answer. I have not made decisions about after I die. I am making decisions about while I live. And if you give it to her, what would you lose that you have told me you reject?" Cal looked out at the water. Being asked. Ruth understood then that his anger was not only about land or money. He wanted to refuse the farm and still have Ruth preserve it for his refusal. He wanted the option to be valued even if he never used it. Perhaps all three children did. "I am asking you now," she said. "Do you want to farm it?" "No." "Do you want to live here?" "No." "Do you want me to sell it so you can inherit cash?" His face hardened. "Not like that. How should I make it sound?" "I don't know. That is the trouble with plain questions." Mara opened the door behind them. Water stopped rising. Ruth looked down. The muddy line sat 2 inches below the top of the second step. Rain continued, but the water did not climb. They watched for 10 minutes. The level remained fixed, then lowered by the width of a finger. Cal stepped into the yard and planted a spare fence stake at the edge. He marked the water with a pocket knife. After another 20 minutes, brown water had fallen below the cut. "It's draining," Mara said. Ruth could hear the wonder she had been afraid to allow herself. The creek was still high. Rain still hammered the fields. The new slough could not empty everything, but it carried the farm's runoff into the meadow and spread the flood where 18 surrendered acres could hold it. Water covered the hay, bent reeds flat, and tore the east fence from its posts. It did not press higher against the house. Tess called at first light. "South entrance is under," she said. "I'm coming around from the county road. Wait until it's safe." "It is safe. Tess, I have Owen in his truck." Owen's voice sounded faintly in the background. "She has an old man who prefers breakfast." Tess arrived by boat with Owen and Leona, who had brought a thermos, and wore a yellow rain suit large enough for 2 people. Harlan remained home under protest. "Feed store took water in the basement," Leona said, as she stepped onto the porch. "I left it there." Seemed happy. They gathered in the kitchen. Owen drank coffee while studying the current through the window. "Banks held," he said. "Meadow did the work." "East fence is gone," Tess added. "North field?" Ruth asked. "Wet. Some wash near the inlet. Nothing like spring. The hay, flat." "Will it come back?" "Some." Ruth nodded. The list mattered. Saving the house did not make the damage imaginary. By 9, the rain weakened. The yard had dropped below the bottom step. Mud appeared in islands around the lilac bush. Mara sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. Leona leaned against the doorframe. Owen and Tess walked only the high edge of the channel, stopping often to point. Cal stood beside the stake he had marked before dawn. Ruth joined him. "It worked," he said. "Yes." He pushed the stake deeper into the soft ground. "Doesn't mean I want it." "I know. Doesn't mean I understand spending that much to keep it." "I know." He looked at her, irritated by the absence of a fight. "What do you want from me?" Ruth considered the empty chair, the unpaid loan, the boat he had bought, the hand that steadied her when she climbed from Tess's John boat. She considered every useful thing she had done, instead of answering that question for herself. I want you to come when you want me, she said. Not my money, not my agreement. Me. Cal's jaw moved. And if I'm angry, he asked, come angry. What if I think you're wrong? You have demonstrated that skill. A reluctant sound escaped him. It did not become a smile. He pulled the marked stake from the yard and leaned it beneath the porch. I need to check the shop. Road's still bad. I'll wait another hour. He did. He ate 2 of Leona's biscuits, checked the furnace again, and carried wet towels to the washing machine. When he left, he hugged Mara, nodded to Tess and Owen, and stood in front of Ruth with his hands at his sides. Ruth did not open her arms for him, not because she did not want to, because she wanted him to choose the distance. Cal stepped forward and hugged her once, hard and brief. Then he left without saying when he would return. The clouds broke in the afternoon. Sunlight appeared across the flooded meadow, turning the water silver. Ruth, Mara, Tess, Owen, and Leona stood on the porch watching the current continue south. The yard was mud. The fence was down. The lower acreage had disappeared beneath a temporary lake. But the house stood dry above its steps, and every hour the water moved farther from it. For the first time since the spring flood, Ruth could look at the farm and see neither Dale's mistake nor her children's rejection. She saw the shape of the life that remained. The silver lasted until evening. Then the water turned brown again beneath the lowering sun, ordinary and cold. Damage appeared as the flood withdrew. The east fence lay twisted through the reeds. 2 sections of the channel bank had slumped, though neither blocked the flow. Gravel washed from the south entrance, and the hay near the meadow looked ironed flat. Mud returned to the yard, the porch steps, and the tires of every vehicle that came to help. Nothing about survival was clean. Harlan arrived the following morning before anyone could stop him. Tess drove him to the sycamore, where he planted his cane in the soft ground and examined the high water marks. "Channel's too narrow here," he said. Owen groaned. "Good morning to you, too. Bank held by luck. Bank held by design. Luck designed half the things men take credit for." Ruth stood between them with a cup of coffee. "Can it wait until the ground dries?" Both men said yes, though in different tones. They repaired the weak section with a gentler curve. Tess reseeded the bare banks and salvaged what hay she could. Ruth paid for new fence only along the higher field, leaving the meadow open enough that future water would not have to tear its way through wire. The cleaning woman came on Friday. Her name was Adele Carter. She was 59, and she showed no interest in being supervised. She arrived with her own vacuum, moved Ruth's kitchen chairs without permission, and cleaned beneath them. "I have attachments," Ruth said. "So do I." Adele continued vacuuming. Ruth went outside before she found something else to correct. When she returned, the floors were clean, the bathrooms smelled of lemons, and nothing important had been rearranged. Every other Friday, Ruth left the house to Adele and took Leona to lunch. She never admitted the arrangement was useful. She simply stopped suggesting they cancel it. Cal called once the week after the storm. The company had made its first scheduled payment to the supplier. He had reduced his office space, gone back into service work himself, and discovered that 2 customers paid faster when he stood in their lobbies. "You offered to call them," he said. "I did. I didn't want you to." "I know." There was a silence. "I called them," he said. "Good." Neither mentioned money. He did not come to supper, though Ruth invited him. He said he was working late. The next invitation received no answer. Ruth put away 1 portion of pot roast, then took it from the freezer 3 days later and ate it herself. She did not tell Mara that Cal was punishing her. She did not tell Evan his brother needed time. Those were translations, and she had retired from the work. The anniversary of Dale's death arrived beneath a pale sky with no rain in it. Ruth woke before dawn and reached across the bed from habit. Her hand found cool sheet. For a moment, the loss was new again. Not the softened absence she carried during ordinary mornings, but the sharp fact of a body no longer where it belonged. She lay still and remembered his last night. Dale had been too weak to complain about the hospital lights. Cal stood at the window. Mara arranged medications on the table after being told 3 times the nurses had already done it. Evan sat beside the bed, holding the hand his father had used to point, repair, strike tables, lift feed sacks, and wave away help. Ruth had stood near the door because everyone else had found a place. Dale looked at her once, near morning. His mouth moved. She leaned close, but whatever he meant remained trapped beneath the breathing mask. Ruth told the children later that he said he loved them. Perhaps he had. Perhaps he asked for water. She had spent 2 years trying not to wonder. By 8, Evan's car was in the driveway. He carried groceries into the kitchen and found Ruth standing at the counter with Dale's brass seed company tag in her hand. "What's that?" he asked. "Truck key tag." "I know what it is." "Why are you staring at it?" "I am allowed private oddness in my own kitchen, within reason." He set onions, carrots, and a chicken on the counter. He had brought the pipe wrench too. "I thought you returned that." "I did." Then the duck press stuck again. "You need a plumber. I have a wrench." It was your father's favorite argument. Evan placed it beside the sink. "I'll leave it here this time." Mara arrived carrying flowers and stopped just inside the mudroom. "Where do you want these?" Ruth looked at the yellow chrysanthemums. "Blue pitcher," she said, "on the table." Mara found the pitcher without moving anything else. Cal's truck did not appear. At 10, Ruth sent him one message. "We're walking the slough at 11 if you want to come." The screen showed it had been delivered, nothing more. She put the phone in a kitchen drawer. Evan cooked while Mara chopped vegetables. Ruth sat at the table and watched them disagree about the proper size of a diced carrot. It was difficult to remain seated. "Those onions need more butter," she said. Evan did not look up. "You're welcome to open a competing restaurant." "In my kitchen?" "Location is everything." Mara added butter when he turned away. At 11, the three of them put on boots. The path began near the north field, followed the orange flags Tess had left in place, and curved around the ground Dale once straightened. Autumn grasses softened the channel banks. Water remained only in the deeper bottom, a clear stream narrow enough to step across. Evan stopped beside the closed farm lane. "This used to go straight through?" "Yes." "So, Tess drives all the way around?" 12 minutes. 6 each way, Mara said. Ruth looked at her. "Why does everyone know that?" "Because Tess tells the story as a labor dispute." They continued toward the sycamore. Ruth had invited the children because she wanted them to see what she had done, then worried the invitation carried the same old demand. Admire the farm. Forgive the price. Agree that staying made her choices right. Beneath the sycamore, she stopped. "Your grandmother Fern stood here when your father filled the slough," Ruth said. "She yelled at him for most of an afternoon." Evan touched the white bark. "Did he listen?" "You met him?" "Fair. I helped him. I drove the tractor hauling soil." Mara looked across the low ground. "Did you think he was right?" "No." "Then why?" Ruth pushed the toe of her boot into fallen leaves. The dry years had scared him. The extra acres mattered, and disagreeing with Dale could turn one decision into a week of weather inside the house. Evan's expression tightened. "I told myself it wasn't worth the fight," Ruth continued. "I told myself lots of things weren't worth the fight. Some of those things belonged to you." Neither child spoke. A crow called from the cottonwoods. Water moved quietly through the opened ground. "I'm sorry," Ruth said. "Not because the farm was always wrong, and not because your father was always cruel. He wasn't. I'm sorry because I used what was good about him to excuse what hurt. I gave you explanations when you needed me to tell the truth." Mara's eyes filled. She looked annoyed by it. Evan placed both hands in his jacket pockets. "I wanted you to admit you knew. I knew some of it. That's enough." "No, it isn't. It's what there is." The sentence sounded like Ruth. She felt the strange pain of hearing one of her habits returned as kindness. Mara wiped beneath one eye. "I didn't hate the farm. I know. I hated that every emergency here became bigger than anything happening anywhere else. I know that too. And after Dad died, you still talked about what needed fixing, never what you wanted. I didn't know. Do you now?" Ruth looked south, where the channel opened into the meadow. Tess had planted hay along the higher margins, while reeds and sedges claimed the wet center. "I want to live in my house. I want to work less than I say I do. I want Tess farming the higher ground because she is better at changing her mind than your father was. I want you to visit without inspecting me." Mara nodded. "That last one may require practice. Every other Friday, Adele already inspects me." Evan smiled. Ruth took a breath. "I also want you to understand that neither of you has to take this farm." Mara looked at Evan. He looked down at the water. "I don't want it," he said. The words hurt, though Ruth had invited them. "I know. I don't know how to care for it. That can be learned. I don't want to learn. That can be true too." He lifted his gaze. "I want to know you without it being the price of admission." Ruth nodded. Mara said, I don't want to run it. I might want the blue pitcher. You are not inheriting kitchenware while I'm using it, I said, eventually. Your brother thought that too. Cal's absence entered the space without anyone naming it. Ruth looked back toward the farmhouse. From here, only the roof showed above the rise. I have made no decision about what happens after me, she said, but I won't keep the land frozen so somebody can reject it later. It has to be worked by people who want the work. If that's Tess, then we'll find a way that doesn't bury her in debt or me in paperwork. Mara nodded slowly. Evan watched the stream. And if Cal is angry? Mara asked. He can come angry. He might not. I know. Ruth had no sentence to make that painless. She let the pain remain its proper size. They walked into the meadow. The second storm had pressed the grass flat in long, shining paths. New green blades had already begun pushing through. Near the creek, water covered Ruth's boots to the ankle, cold and clear enough to show stones beneath it. Evan cooked Dale's anniversary meal. The chicken skin burned on one side because Mara distracted him with a story about Leona threatening a feed salesman with a broom. Ruth ate 2 pieces and said nothing about the burn. Tess joined them, along with Leona, Harlan, and Owen. Cal's chair remained empty. This time, Ruth did not set a plate in front of it. After dinner, Evan washed dishes. Mara dried. Tess carried leftovers to the refrigerator, while Leona criticized the soft-close hinges again. Harlan fell asleep in the open space where Dale's recliner had been. The house was noisy without pretending everyone was present. By late afternoon, the others had gone. Mara kissed Ruth's cheek before leaving. Evan placed the pipe wrench in Dale's wooden toolbox and closed the lid. For plumbing only, Ruth told him. No promises. When his car disappeared, Tess remained on the porch. Walk? She asked. Ruth put on her boots. They followed the slough without measuring anything. No flags, no maps, no rent figures. At the meadow, sunlight rested on the water between the grasses. You all right? Tess asked. No, Ruth said. And yes. Useful answer. I contain multitudes, Tess laughed. They stood together as the last of the storm water slipped south toward the creek. Ruth could see where it had bent the hay, where it had taken the fence, and where the field remained firm above it. She had not saved everything. She had stopped requiring herself to. The water moved through the place Ruth remembered, carrying leaves between the reeds without hurry or permission. This time, she let it go.